The river smelled of salt and rot and tar, and the wind that came up from Blackwater Bay carried a breath of far-off storms. In the Tower of the Hand, Eddard Stark set his palm upon the cool stone of the window embrasure and watched the gulls wheel over the masts. The sky was the flat, heavy blue of a blade that had not yet tasted blood. That would change. Everything changed in the south. He had not slept. Candle stubs crowded his table like the bones of fish after a lean feast, and their gutters of wax had hardened into pale ribs. The book lay closed before him, the fat old thing of genealogies and marriages, its cracked calfskin cover stained with the oil of many fingers. He had not needed to reopen it. The faces in his mind had arranged themselves into a line, black-haired, blue-eyed, threaded back through parts and princes and lords of Storm's End, all the way until memory gave over to legend. And in that unbroken dark hair, he had found a silence more terrible than any shout. If Robert had been here, there would have been shouting. Robert shouted like a storm. He hunted like one too, and bled like one, and drank to forget the noise that followed in the wind's wake. Robert was not here. Robert had taken his cups and his spear and gone laughing into the Kingswood, with Lancel Lannister hovering and butter-tongued, and a boar had put its tusk where a man's life had no kindness. Ned pressed his thumb to the red-black bloom of the hand's seal upon his letter to Dragonstone and let the wax cool. To Stannis Baratheon, Lord of Dragonstone, by the grace of all the gods, Robert's true heir, hand of the King Eddard Stark sent the words he had no right to keep and no time to soften. He wrote of hair and eyes and bastards and lineages. He wrote of a queen's bed and a brother's sin. He wrote the law as he had learned it at his father's knee and strengthened it with what truth he owned, and he asked Stannis to come, not in secrecy but at once, with all the weight of his claim. He sealed a second letter to Springhall, to his wife, telling her all he dared and more than he would have told anyone south of the Neck. He did not write to Lisa in the Vale. He was done with secrets passed like cups at a feast until they spilled. Littlefinger he had not summoned. He did not go to the Godswood. It was no Godswood to him, a pool without a heart tree, a pause without a prayer. He stood with his hand on the stone and listened to the wind and said to it, "Robert, return to me sober and whole." The wind made no promise. When Varys came, he smelled of powdered iris and damp linen as ever, a summer garden over the knife. "My lord hand works early," the spymaster said, slipping through the door like a shadow that had noticed the light was not a friend. "Or too late," Ned said. "Has the king returned?" "Ah." Varys tilted his head, eyes never quite meeting Ned's. "By tomorrow's sun, if the gods are as fond as they seem. Our brave Lord Renly's huntsmen run before his litter to clear the road, and the boar, how impressive, how dreadfully impressive, has no need of haste any longer." "Don't trim it to cleverness," Ned said. "How bad is it? The king is alive. He is cut. He is in pain. He is very drunk. A blink soft as a cat's. Young Lancel is in pieces with guilt, which the boy calls his devotion. A difficult gash to stitch. The Grand Maester will stitch his lips with the rest Old Town fashion." "Could the wine have been stronger than it should?" Ned asked. Varys's head tilted further. "Wine grows stronger in memory. I want a guard doubled on my daughters. A wise thought for all men with daughters." Varys's powder was a little cloying in the heat. "And wiser still. He let the rest be a purse he would not open." Ned did not give him coin. "If the city wakes with Stannis' sails on the river," he said, "what will the gold cloaks do?" Varys's hands fluttered. "What they always do. Count. The watch counts coin, counts wives, counts how many men they need to fight and how many to hang after. Lord Janos counts most." "And whose coin does Janos count?" Ned said. Varys smiled. "Once no one's, and it was a happier time. Now, questions like that are dangerous to ask in such a handsome voice." Ned let him keep his coyness. He was done with asking those questions to anyone but the man whose answer would be steel. "Has the queen moved?" "Not at all," Varys said lightly. "She is still where she always is, my lord hand. In the middle of a web she thinks is her own, and with her hands as clean as prayer." He tipped his head. You will see her soon enough. I will not speak to her until I must. Ned's throat was dry. If Stannis reaches the Blackwater, tell me. If Stannis reaches the Blackwater, Varys repeated, as if he were learning a song. You will be told. When the door shut upon him, the room felt larger. Ned took a breath and went to wake his household. They came half-sleeping, in shirts and hose, knuckles rubbing the startled night out of their eyes. Fat Tom tucked his hair behind his ears with those great hands that seemed made for gentle things until they closed around a sword. Jory was gone, dead on the street of steel with Jaime Lannister's men around him, and that loss was a hollow in Ned that never filled. He had learned to balance upon its edge. He would do it again. He had no choice. Sansa will be told that nothing has changed, he said. Arya will be told not to show her teeth to leopards. Tomard, you and Vayan will each keep 5 men at their doors. No one enters unless I know it. If one of you has to piss, the other watches. And you? Fat Tom asked softly. I will be where I am needed. He thought of the sealed letters and of the weight of the king's ring on his finger. And for everything else, we will wait. The last word had a taste of ash. Waiting had seemed cowardice when Robert breathed and laughed and shouted. Waiting might be wisdom now, and if so, it was wisdom that burned. At Dragonstone, the sea beat at black stone like a smith at an olden vill, and the forges of the island answered in kind. Davos Seaworth walked the quay with the letter in his hand and salt on his tongue. The wind lashed. His cloak flapped like a sail's half-remembered song. The boy had run all the way to Davos's small house below the Sea Dragon Tower, bare feet slapping on wet stone. To the Lord Stannis, he had said, breathless, eyes as wide as plates. From the hand. The boy knew nothing of seals beyond the wax that stuck to his little fingers. Davos flicked a thumb against the red wax. My thanks, he told the child, and sent him away with a coin that bought a loaf and maybe kindness besides. He climbed the slope to the keep, past gargoyles whose mouths, when rain ran, looked as if they drooled melted night. He had been a smuggler and had known many monsters that changed shape with coin and darkness. Stone was kinder. Stone only pretended to move. In the Stone Drums Hall, he found Stannis Baratheon standing before the long, narrow table shaped like a map of the 7 kingdoms. The painted wood made the land seem flat, small, something that could be covered with a man's foot if the man were large enough. Stannis was not large in the way Robert had been, but he set his boots as though he were ready to crack the earth to show it the fire beneath. Your lordship, Davos bowed, letter in his hand. He had no gift for fancy bows. He had learned to swim while wearing onions like a banner. He did not forget it. A raven from King's Landing. Stannis held out his hand as if he thought the letter might be hot. Davos put it in his palm. On the Lord's other hand, the nails were chewed ragged, and there were half-moon sores where teeth had shaved the skin. Stannis did not notice. He broke the seal with an impatient crack, read as if the words were soldiers in need of drilling, eyes snapping back to catch any stragglers, jaw tightening. When he raised his head, something like triumph stood in the bones of his face. It did not show itself to be admired. Get me Cresson, he said, voice flat and hard. And the Red Woman. Davos swallowed. He wondered if the fire in the hearth had grown hotter or if the night wind had slipped past him with a dreary sigh. At once, my lord. He found the maester in his tower, his bald head bent over a small garden of herbs that had no right to be so green in the salt air. Maester Cresson's hands trembled but were deft, and he smelled of old paper and the stubborn life of mint. News, Cresson said, looking up. He had taught Stannis letters and sums and the hard habit of mornings. Davos thought the old man must have been weary since the day he first taught that boy to hold a quill like a blade. Davos gave him the shape of the letter, not its words. That was for Stannis and no other man. Even so, Cresson's face went gray, then pink with something like indignation, and then settled into the pallor of duty. A bad business, he murmured. A bad business that must be mended. Melisandre he found in a chamber where no candles burned. She did not need them. The air around her seemed to lean toward light simply because she breathed. Red hair fell like a banner down her back, and the gown she wore was the color of coals in the last watch of the night, when a man thought they had died until they bit his fingers. "Lord Stannis commands you," Davos said. Melisandre smiled as if he had said, "The tide obeys the moon." He is obeyed. In the hall, she and Cresson stood like the two ends of a bow not yet strung. Stannis read the letter aloud now, sparing none of its iron. When he came to the words rightful heir, the air seemed to turn colder, as if the wind had come up from some deep place beneath Dragonstone and had learned to carry the taste of ash and old sorrow. Cresson took off his maester's chain and folded it into his robe with careful hands. "My lord," he said, peering like a falcon who had learned his prey by heart. "This is a matter for lords, for laws, for the faith, for the realm, not for fires and—" "For the law," Stannis said, cutting him off. "For the law, maester. I have been laughed at for the law since I was half a man. My brother laughed loudest. I have been told to bend and told to feast and told to be merry at the end of other men's jests. I do not bend. I do not feast. I do not forget." He folded the letter and tucked it against his belt as if it were a knife. "I go to King's Landing with the fleet." Cresson's eyes shone with wetness that could have been pride and could have been fear. "At once. At once." Stannis glanced once at Melisandre. "And the Lord of Light will look kindly on swiftness." "The night is dark and full of terrors," Melisandre said, as if remembering a favorite line of a song. "But the dawn waits for the right man." Davos thought of storms. You could sail in them with a stubborn heart and tight lines and a blessing you did not name. But there was a difference between courage and arrogance. Stannis had never been arrogant. He had been something stonier. If there was a wall, Stannis leaned until it knew it had been a gate all along. "Your lordship," Davos said carefully, "the Storm Lords are not all close. They will not be called in a night." "I have enough men," Stannis said. "I have ships. Ned Stark is hand and holds the tower. I will not give Lannisters 1 hour more than they have stolen. Sail." Davos bowed again. The word had the sea in it. "Aye, my lord." The king returned to King's Landing borne on a litter whose poles creaked under the weight of a legend that had gone soft. The boar's tusks had dug a furrow into his thigh, a red trench cut into flesh that had once been iron under fat. Robert Baratheon gritted his teeth around the pain and around the wine that had washed pain into a dull chant. He coughed and swore and laughed and winced and drank again when the cup came to his mouth. Ned met him with the ring heavy as a fallen star on his finger. Robert put a hand out, thick and warm and trembling, and grabbed Ned's forearm. "You," he said, a growl with the last scraps of the man Ned had loved inside it. "You'll write it. You always did the dull things. Gods, my leg, fuck." Pycelle oozed like a spoonful of cold porridge at the king's shoulder. "Only a scratch, your grace," he crooned. "A war wound, a hunter's badge." "It's a price of my own damn foolishness," Robert said. "Stop lying like a Southron grandmother and find a bed where I can spread this fat and die comfortable." "You will not die," Cersei said, green eyes bright. She had come down unexpected, wrapped in yellow silk, hair coiled like wealth. Lancel hovered behind her like a shadow that had done a poor job with its lesson. "You are too strong to die." "I'm too stubborn to die," Robert said. "Strength's for men who don't drink. Where is my son?" Ned's throat lodged a stone he could not swallow. He should have said, "Your son is with the septa, your son waits." He could not say those words. The letter to Dragonstone had already told the truth what his mouth refused. "He is in the Red Keep safe," he said, and that was true. Robert grunted. "Good. Bring him after. Now." He let his head fall back as the litter stuttered up the steps. The pain took him like a hand around a throat and shook him until he went white around the mouth and then red again. "Damn that boar. Damn this city. Damn the South." Ned wrote. He wrote what Robert said to write, and then he wrote what Robert would have said if he had been sober and whole and a king and not a man about to know the dark intimately. When he gave the parchment into Robert's hand, The king blinked and tried to read and gave up and signed with his name that had once made men cheer. "Protector," Robert said. Until the rightful heir comes of age. Do the right thing, Ned." It was the first time he had spoken the man's name that day. Not as a joke, not as a weapon. He put a hand upon his friend's head as if Ned were a younger brother. "Do the right thing." "I will." Robert slept then, mouth open, breath ragged. The stink of blood and stale wine and fear clung to the bed hangings. Cersei watched from the chair in the corner with hands that lay perfectly sweet and still in her lap. When Ned rose, she rose. "You look tired, Lord Stark," she said, each word a piece of jewelry. "You should rest." "I will," he said, and did not. In the passage Varys drifted toward him like a cloud that had remembered it was only smoke. "He has signed?" the eunuch asked. Ned closed his hand around the tube of Robert's warrant. "He has." "Then your work begins." "Has not it been begun for a long time?" Ned said, and Varys's smile was approving as a tutor's who has at last coaxed a slow child to say his sums without prompting. It was the last night before the city learned a new name for fear. Ned spent it doing what little kindness there was still time to do. He went to his daughter's chambers and sat with them, one at a time, watching the way sleep made us all who we had been at 6 years old. Sansa slept with her mouth a little open and her hands folded upon her breast like a lady in a tomb. Arya slept like a cat, sprawled on her back, her hair a snarl that had its own ideas about the ambitions of combs. He thought of Jon, of the wall, of the kind of winter a boy learns when the wind knows his name. He thought of Bran, of the silent forest, of a raven on a sill. He went to the Tower of the Hand and burned the candle to the nub, reading lines he had already memorized. When dawn seeped into the casement like a confession, Tomard came with a face folded by worry. "Ships," Tomard said. "A forest of them, Lord." Ned let his breath out slowly and went to the window. The bay was a sheet of hammered metal dotted with masts, their sails not yet fully spread. The ships were black on the water like swords laid with care. From this distance you could not read a banner. They were too many to count all at once without losing your place. "Stannis," Ned said. The bells of the city began to ring, as if someone had decided everyone should be woken at once. The sound came over the roofs and into the bones. The red keep shook with it. Birds rose, startled, and wheeled. When the queen came, she came with the Kingsguard. Barristan Selmy's white cloak had a weight to it that made the air around him feel punished. Meryn Trant's eyes were small and resentful in a face that had always been a little pinched. Boros Blunt breathed as if he had eaten more than duty, and Ares Oakheart stood grave with youths only half shed. The last was Preston Greenfield, looking carefully at nothing. There were no Lannister colors among them save the thread Cersei wore. Jaime was away, ever away, a sword in the field rather than a voice in the hall. Cersei's eyes were cool-cut glass. "What are those ships?" she said. "Ships," Ned said. "What they mean we will learn. It is said dragons once came ashore here," she said idly. "We have grown used to thinking of ourselves as the only fire worth burning. It is strange to be reminded of the sea's opinion." Ned had no appetite for her games. "The king sleeps," he said. "He will hold court after he wakes." "No," Cersei said. "The king will be seen now. The realm will see him awake and unbroken. The realm will see his son stand at his side." Ned's hand closed around the tube. "Your Grace," he said, each syllable weighed. "It would be better to let him rest, and have the city believe rumors before the truth?" She smiled, a flower edged with quartz. "No. Call the council. Have my son brushed and dressed. He has things to learn." She turned, and the white cloaks turned with her like geese. Only Barristan paused, the smallest hesitation, eyes resting on Ned's hand as if the Lord Commander could see through leather and gold to parchment. Then he followed. The small council chamber smelled of dust and old wine. Renly arrived all in green and gold, disgusted at having been roused from a morning that had promised him company. Littlefinger came draped in mockery as in silk, a feather from some northern bird at his sleeve as if to remind Ned how far from home he stood. Pycelle tottered. Varys had already arrived and already looked tired. "The ships are Stannis's," Varys announced as though it were a thing he'd only just let himself believe. "His sigil flies upon the largest. The Fury rides the Blackwater like a hawk." "Nonsense," Littlefinger said lightly, though his eyes pricked like needles. "Stannis is a careful man. He would want to call his banners. Perhaps he has—" Varys murmured. "He has had some days. Raven's wings are quick. The sea is quicker." Renly leaned upon the table with his long hands braced, making the painted mountains crease under his palms. He looked toward the narrow sea with a lover's impatience. "Stannis thinks the law will be enough," he said. "Law never made men joyful. It makes them orderly," Barristan said. He had entered quietly. His voice carried. "Order is better than joy. Tell that to a man on a feast day," Renly said, but his smile was thin. He had eyes enough to measure a storm. They filed to the throne room when the bells began another fit. Someone had thrown the great doors wide, and the heat spilled in so the air in the hall rippled the banners into little waves. The Iron Throne crouched where it always had. An ugly thing that made the steps up to it look like a wounded creature had been dragged there to die, leaving a trail of broken steel behind. Robert's litter groaned to a halt 2 steps short. He lifted himself up with hands like hammers and stood swaying, a king again if you did not look too closely at the way he leaned. Joffrey stood to Robert's right, pale and thin and pleased with himself, a boy who had learned to love mirrors. Cersei was on the other side, gold hair bound back from her face and a smile you had to imagine was kind if you had never read another page of her book. Ned came and bowed and climbed only halfway up the steps. "Your Grace," he said, and when the boy turned his face to him, he looked for a moment at Robert and saw none of him there. Robert's voice was a gravel road. "Read it," he told Ned, and held out his thick hand. Ned slid the parchment into that hand and then took it back again and broke the seal and made himself pronounce the words as if he were laying stones to cross a river. "True and placed and lawful and protector." When he had done, the chamber stirred like grass in a sudden wind. Cersei's smile did not move. "Protector then, Lord Stark," she said sweetly. "Until my son, until the rightful heir," Ned said. He did not look at her. He was looking at Barristan, at Varys, at the faces that had learned to read danger better than law. "By the king's hand," he added and raised the parchment. "Sealed." Renly's laughter came out too sharp and stopped too suddenly. "Your Grace," he said. "Best not to lean." Robert had swayed, and a man named Tomard took a step without thinking any better of it. Cersei's fingers dipped like a fish and tugged at the parchment. Ned held it. Their hands brushed. He felt the smallness of her bones. He felt the purpose in them like wire. "It is nothing," Robert muttered. "Only ale." His face twisted with pain, and he slammed his hand down upon the arm of the Iron Throne, and a bit of it caught and sliced his palm. He bled. The chamber hushed as if they had all felt the cut. "The ships," someone cried from the doors. The murmur of the bells had become something else. Horns. "The harbor." Ned did not turn. If he looked away, he would never look back. "Janos," he called, seeing the gold of the watch commander's cloak near the barricade. "The city is not to be harmed. Riot will be punished." Janos Slint looked from Ned to Cersei to Joffrey as if he were counting shares in a ship not yet launched. He licked his lips. "I am Lord Hand," he said. Cersei put her palm flat upon the parchment where it lay. "I commend your caution," she told Ned. "We will all need it." Then the doors boomed wide, hammered back against the wall by sailors' hands, and men in black and gold poured through like oil poured too suddenly from a jar. Davos came among them, plain-faced, bearded, plain altogether in a room that glittered. He knew where to stand. At the bottom of the steps, having entered like a messenger, not like a conqueror. Behind him, a man whose hair lay upon his head like iron filings left near a magnet came, wearing no crown and needing none. Stannis Baratheon halted with a measure of the room, nodded once as if he acknowledged that it was large but not wide enough to keep a man from another man's throat. "Brother," he said, Robert turned his head. For a heartbeat, the old fire sprang to his face, but pain twisted it into irony. "I have only one brother," he said, "and he's as stubborn as a bridge." Stannis's mouth became a line thinner than the edge of a blade. "You do not have a son," he said. He looked at Joffrey as if he looked upon some argument he had already crushed and now had to step over lest he soil his boot. The hall drew breath again and held it. Cersei stepped forward smoothly. "Leave this hall," she said to Stannis, and her voice was honey poured over rock. "Leave my sight. Take your ships and your men and your god and go back to your wet island. You are not wanted. You were never loved. Not by your brother. Not by anyone. My wants are not in the reckoning," Stannis said. "Law is. The law is what the king says," Cersei said. "The king is a man's law," Stannis said, and the words were ugly in his mouth because they had no laughter in them to cloak the coldness. A truth and not a jest. "This is no king's get. This is no Baratheon." He lifted his voice without raising it. "Lord Barristan, do your duty." Every man in the room was a word in a sentence no one had yet agreed to speak aloud. Barristan Selmy had made more than his share of such sentences. He moved slowly, deliberately, like a knight at a dance where honor was the only partner. He went to Robert first, and the king, whose pain had made him impatient with everything but death, put his maimed hand against the old man's shoulder with a weariness that looked at last like gratitude. "Don't make this uglier," Robert muttered. Barristan bowed his head a fraction. Then he turned. Joffrey had gone rigid, lips drawn back not in a smile but in a child's readiness to bite. Cersei's hand closed on his wrist hard enough to bruise the thin flesh. "Sire," she said, and in that single word was all the promise she owned and all the threat she had ever learned to wield. "Remember your vows." "I have," Barristan said, "longer than anyone." He took a step toward the boy and then another, and the white of his cloak seemed to swallow the light in the hall. The hound shifted his weight, lazy as a cat. He was not one of the white cloaks, but he had forgotten how to be anything else. He had been told to watch the boy, and so he watched, and his eyes kept sliding toward the door as if he smelled smoke the rest of them had not yet noticed. Davos saw the way his hand tightened and loosened upon his sword hilt and thought of pitch and tar and a child who had learned that fire was not always a kindness. Meryn Trant made a noise in his throat and took a half-step forward. Barristan's gaze pinned him where he stood. "Try me," the old man said softly, and Meryn did not. "Enough," Ned said. He had the parchment in his fist again, and he would not lose it. "This is folly. We will not fight in the king's hall." He looked at the boy. "Joffrey, come with Ser Barristan. The king's justice will be done in private." "Don't talk to me like that," the boy snapped, voice breaking with fury. He jerked his arm from his mother's hold. "I am the king. I command you to." "Stop," Robert whispered, the syllable full of the kind of power a man only has when he is too tired to lie. Joffrey froze because the sound of pain is a kind of truth that even foolish boy kings recognize. Robert blinked slowly. "Stop and listen. Stark will do it. He always did." He coughed. "Stannis is a pain." "Gods, Stannis, have you never been anything else?" "I have been right," Stannis said. "I said it." Robert let his head fall back. "Protector," he muttered. "Do it. Take him away, Selmy. Don't kill him. Gods, Cersei, don't make me watch your tears." He closed his eyes. His breath came and went like a tide dragging pebbles. Cersei moved then, faster than the court had seen her move in years, perhaps ever. She put her body between Barristan and Joffrey and spread her arms as if she could make herself into a door the old knight would not open. The hound's hand found his hilt. Janos Slint put 2 fingers to his lips and whistled a note that made the gold cloak straighten like hounds scenting meat. Davos took a step without thinking. His sons had run this hard and this blind and this ready. Once, when men had come to take what little they owned and might have taken more. He did not have sons now. He had a hand burned for a king and a lord and a new king with a claim older than the city's grime. He put himself beside Barristan and felt small next to the white. "Sire," he said. "Let the law walk beside you." Barristan nodded. He looked at Cersei. "My lady, my queen," he said, the second word like a letter he had been forced to write to the wrong recipient. "Stand aside." No, her voice was a quiet thing that frightened more than a scream would have done. "Then forgive me," Barristan said, and placed his hand upon her shoulder and moved her as if she weighed nothing. His kindness made her shock enough that she forgot to claw his face. Joffrey's eyes went wide enough to show the pale ring around the iris. "Ser Sandor," Cersei said, and the hound's chin came up as if someone had jerked it on a string. "Take my son." "No, Robert Mater." "Stop." He was trying to rise again, and the effort tore a groan out of him like silk ripped across teeth. The hound's head turned toward the doors. The sound that had been distant, that had been bells and horns and rumor, had become closer, a drum. Men's feet, the clatter of armor. A voice raised in command that had never learned to cajole. Stannis's men were in the keep. "Fuck this," the hound said softly, and let his hand fall from his sword. He stepped back as if to say, "If there is to be law, let it be done, and do not make me do your cutting for you." Janos Slint's breath rattled in his throat. He chose. "Stand fast," he told his men, and they did, which is a kind of courage. Barristan took the boy's wrist as carefully as he could, as if Joffrey were a fine vase you had found to be counterfeit, but a man ought not smash what he did not intend to bury. Joffrey spat, small and venomous. It fell upon the old man's gauntlet and slid away like foam. Cersei made a sound then, a wordless thing, and for a moment Ned thought she had become the girl she had once been. The child in the West whose father had told her she would be queen and who had learned later what queens were and were not. Then steel came to her again. "You will regret this," she whispered. "I regret many things," Barristan said, and led the boy away under the watchful eyes of men who had seen glory and learned to distrust it. Later, the scream that ran like a knife through Maegor's holdfast was not Cersei's. It was Sansa's, once, when the queen's ladies took hold of her arm and told her, sweetly, what would happen to girls whose fathers betrayed kings. It was short-lived. The queen had other concerns. Arya's scream came a different hour, a different hall, as she watched the first sword of Bravos break a stout stick over men who wore steel. Syrio Farrell moved as though the air had always been his, but steel close. D. Werewood cracked, and Marentrant was as relentless as winter. "Run," Syrio told the girl, and she ran. She ran into corridors she had mapped with her feet these past months, into kitchens where the smell of onions and fat had learned her name, through a door that led to a lesser door that led her into daylight and noise and the stink of the river in heat. A sailor's hand reached for her. She bit it. Another hand, gentler, checked itself and took her by the shoulder with a pressure that said, "I have children, and I will not harm you." "Easy," Davos said. "Easy, wolf girl." She fought. Davos recognized that fight. He had seen it in cats and starving men and once in the eyes of his own wife, long ago, when a wave had come and taken what had been on the shore. "Your Lord Father," he said, and felt her stiffen. "He sent Stannis. He sent me. Don't bite me, and I'll take you where he wanted you to be." "Where is my sister?" she demanded, wild, hair plastered to her forehead, eyes sparking. If Davos had known, he would have told her. He did not lie. He shook his head. "We'll find out. But not standing here." A horn sounded. The men in black and gold pushed forward through the postern gate into which someone had forgotten to jam the right wedge at the right hour. Davos had been born for that kind of wedge. "Come on, sweetling," he said, and the girl looked as if she might scratch his eyes and then thought better and went with him. Ned did not see them go. He watched Stannis walk up the steps to the Iron Throne and not sit. "I will not claim my seat on the heels of a man's blood on the floor," Stannis said. "My brother yet breathes." "Barely," Renly muttered, and left the hall like a man who had been promised a hunt and given instead an argument about fences. Littlefinger drifted after him, smiling to himself as if counting coins. Varys remained. Varys remained like a river remains when you think you have redirected it. Pycelle had wept a little, convincingly, and then went to his tower to brew the right drafts. Janos Slint, who had made his choice, inspected his men and decided they might be better rewarded by those who had better coin and more time in the city. He bowed very low to Stannis. The queen had vanished into Maegor's holdfast with a sweep of silk and a dozen attendants with faces as calm as masks. Gates groaned. Chains. Crossbows at the loopholes. Cersei was a quick study when fear taught. "Lord Stark," Stannis said without preamble. "You will continue as hand. Proclaim it." Ned felt the tiredness in his bones like old snow. He said, because everything else would bring the roof down. "Lord Varys, send to every gate. No man is to quit his post. No torch is lit near pitch. The city is under rule, not under siege. Any looting will be answered with the block." Varys bowed. "How restful," he murmured. Ned turned to Davos. He had known men like him in the north. Quiet, common-born, truthful more often than the noble, perhaps because there was less coin in lies where little coin lived. "You brought my daughter?" "Only the wild one," Davos said. "She bites. That's Arya." He could not keep the edge of relief from his voice. His heart then went cold in his chest. "Sansa?" "Not seen," Davos said with the plainness that had always seemed to him a gift. "But not dead. Not with the queen. If the queen had a dagger as well as a mouth, she'd have used it here in this hall." "Too noisy," Stannis said. "She will think of something else. We take the holdfast." "There's a drawbridge," Davos said. "Over water. She can keep it up until your men rot. Then we will speak to her and to the lords," Stannis said. He looked toward the doors by which Barristan had taken the boy. "Bring Joffrey back only when I ask for him." An hour later, they stood upon the outer curtain looking over at Maegor's holdfast across the deep, black moat. The drawbridge hung up like a sly man's smile. Banners hung in the still air. They were not the lion alone. Some bore the stag and the lion twined, as if Cersei had decided that if she could not make law, she could at least make art. The white cloaks stood upon the wall walk. Boros Blunt had found shade and was sweating anyway. Ares Oakhart looked desperately young. Preston Greenfield was neat as a pin. Meryn Trant leaned as if tired of his own weight. "Make them hear me," Stannis said, and his voice did not trouble itself to rise. Davos took a horn from a man at his elbow and blew. The note went out and came back and scattered against stone. Cersei appeared at the Merlin above the gate. She looked like a painting hurriedly finished. Beautiful, flat, missing a detail the painter had not remembered until too late. "My lords," she said. "My ladies." She had none beside her. "I regret I cannot invite you to enter. You have made it impossible." "Open," Stannis said. "Climb," Cersei said. "If your men are so eager to be chewed by stone." "You hold my daughter," Ned said, stepping to the very lip of the parapet as if stature could be remade with will. "You will give her to me." "You hold my son," Cersei said. "There has always been an exchange in this world." Ned delved for anger and found, to his own surprise, patience. "We will trade," he said. "The boy for the girl. The rest will wait upon law." Cersei laughed. "On law? Have you learned nothing, Lord Stark? Law is for men without lions." "We will bring the septon," Stannis said. "We will bring the small folk. We will show them the truth. And they will know a bastard when they see one." "Bastard," Cersei said, and every tooth showed. "How brave of you to call a child names from the safety of your stones." "We will not starve you," Ned said, ignoring what could not be answered. "No butcher will cut meat and sell it rotting. No one will light torches under your walls. No. You will sit and you will think, and you will give me my daughter, and you will send me Joffrey's sword." Cersei tilted her head. "Do you know what I will do, Lord Stark? I will sing to your pretty child. I will tell her stories. She loves stories, does Sansa. And at night I will drink. I will think of your face when I told you this." She leaned forward. "You should have gone home when you had the chance." Her hair blew in a wind that had risen out of the river. She stepped back. The white cloaks did not move. Davos lowered the horn. Stannis frowned. "She thinks the walls make her honest," he said. We will see. They did not starve Maegor's holdfast. They brought Loras Tyrell's injured vanity into it on the back of rumor when Renly, angry at being denied the taste of a court's applause, had slipped away that night with all the swords he could bribe or charm from the guards of the White Sword Tower and the halls of the noble. He had bent close to Sansa's door and whispered to her ladies to come quickly, and one had screamed, and the rest had bolted like hens from a fox, and in that moment Cersei's hold had changed from stone to laughter and knives. Loras had retreated with the puncture wounds to his pride nicely bandaged. Renly had gone with him, riding before dawn, a green cloak flaring on his shoulders like a lie men would line up to tell for him, toward Highgarden where the flowers were. Stannis watched them go from the walls and did not bother to send men after them. "We will deal with him when he becomes what he is going to become," he said. "What is that?" Ned asked. "An obstacle," Stannis answered, and turned back to the business of making law in a city that had learned to confuse it with spectacle. By mid-afternoon, the Fury and her sisters rode at anchor in the river, and men came ashore in ordered files. Stannis set a watch on every postern and made a counting of every storehouse within 3 streets of the river, and when his officers told him that so-and-so had promised this and that, he replied that promises had to be written, signed, witnessed, and not by men who had ever smiled at a Lannister. He had the king's warrant read at the mouth of every alley, at the September and at the Street of Steel, and before the dragon's skulls down in the darkness where a dragon's memory might make even Stannis pinch his lips. He ordered the headsman's block set in the yard and had the axe honed, and when Janos Slynt came with a compliant bow and a list of names in a neat hand that was not his, Stannis said, "We will not make a terror," as if he tasted something that had gone stale. Ned arranged the city around that steadiness as though he had been given a frame and told to bind its joints until it held. He sent men to the Mud Gate and the King's Gate with orders in duplicate and a threat quietly spoken. There would be no second chance. He sent men to the docks to warn captains they would not leave without writ. He sent men to the Street of Flour to tell bakers they would bake or they would learn what a lack of bread does to a city. He sent a letter to his wife, a longer one than he had written the day before, telling her that the city had not burned and that one of their daughters was safe, and that the other was somewhere inside a woman's mind that had learned to turn corners too sharply. He brought Arya to him before nightfall. She came with Davos at her elbow, hair tangled, cheeks smudged, eyes alight with a fierce relief that made her look not like a child but like some small animal that had found its den after foxes had run. The hand who was sometimes a father put his hands around her face and thanked whatever gods listened in the south that for one small good thing. "I killed a boy with a stick," she said at once, guilt and glory hand in hand. "Maybe he lived." "May he have," Ned said, because that was a thing they could both wish at once and not hurt anything by it. "You will not go anywhere without Tomard or Davos until I say. You will not climb anywhere. You will not bite anyone." She made a face. She was Arya. "What about Sansa?" "We are going to fetch her," he said. "How?" she asked. "We will find a door," Davos said. "The sea always does." "Not with fire," Arya muttered, glowering at the candle. Ned thought of a tall man whose face was a map of scars and who had flinched from the brazier like a horse from a whip. "No," he said, "not with fire." Barristan came to him then, quiet, the weight of a day in the line of his shoulders. "He is in the tower, guarded and fed," the old knight reported. "He did not have to name the boy. He has asked for his mother thrice. He has stopped asking now. He breaks things instead." "He is a child," Ned said, and Barristan's mouth bent the slightest fraction. "He is," the old man agreed. "So is your daughter. Both true." Ned let himself imagine a world in which both those truths could be reconciled by something softer than an axe. He let himself and then put the thought aside, tidy as a cup placed back upon the shelf. "Ser Barristan, thank you. You have done what the realm will remember." "Let it remember something worth remembering," Barristan murmured. "We are none of us young, Lord Stark, and we have watched men make kings from other men's bones. I would rather remember a day when it was done differently." "Then help me do it," Ned said. "I will," Barristan answered, as if he had just been told his oath anew, At sunset, Stannis called the council. They gathered in a chamber that had seen many arguments and few decisions. Varys made himself small in a corner as if he were a cushion and not a man. Littlefinger came late, as if men should be grateful he had come at all, eyes bright with the calculation that never seemed to sleep in him. Renly's chair was empty. Stannis recited the facts as he knew them in an order that brooked no interruption. My brother lies abed with a wound. He has named Lord Eddard Stark protector of the realm until the rightful heir comes of age. The Lannister woman has denied the will's meaning. I have come to enforce it. I'll have the queen and her kin's treason proved. I will have the boy's parentage examined before the lords. I will not have the city burned. I will not have women or children harmed. The law is a shield for those it can reach. We will make it reach farther. Stirring, Littlefinger said, plucking at a thread upon his sleeve. And ambitious. Words can be like masts. They lift a ship's sails prettily until a storm tests them. How do we keep the sails from tearing? By making them out of canvas, Davos said, surprising himself. Littlefinger's glance flicked to him and away as if a rat had spoken and a courtier had been amused. How do you prove what is true to men who do not wish to know it? Varys asked mildly. Ned looked at him, remembering other nights, other chambers. You invite the lords to witness. You show them the evidence. You remind them what Robert looked like at 12 and at 20, and then you tell them to look at this boy's hair. Hair is not proof, Cersei said from the doorway, and they all turned like sunflowers. She had come without gaudy attendants, wearing a dress the green of leaves turned by evening light. She held nothing in her hands but the angle of her chin. You found the door, Stannis said without surprise. If a mouse can, she said, and glanced at Varys, whose face did something like a flinch without moving. You will not have the boy paraded. Her voice held, not request, not outrage, but something like resolve that frightened men more than the first two. It was the sound of someone who had written down the dangerous thing she was going to do and had decided to do it despite. The boy will stand before the lords, Stannis said. Your other children too. Other children, she said, and the word had a softness that made Ned feel suddenly old. Myrcella is a child. Tommen is a child. Joffrey is a child whose temper does not keep his heart from beating. Men like you like to make a noise like justice. Your noise happens to other people. Then bring them, Stannis said, and something in his voice softened as if he had recognized what he hated most in the world. A thing that forced him to speak beyond law. Bring them, Cersei. I will not have them hurt. I do not kill children. You burn gods, she said. I light truth, Melisandre said from the hearth. She had come with a footstep no one heard, as if a shadow had learned to be proud. The night is dark and... Not here, Ned said, and she looked at him. Her eyes made him feel for an instant as if he stood on some great height and the sea were calling. Not in my city. Melisandre smiled, as if he had said a child's sweet thing. Your city, Lord Stark? For now, he said. Cersei looked from one to another of them, weighing and finding most wanting. You will not have Joffrey to the sept, she said. You will not have him to the hall. If you try, I will call down the lion on every street. The lion is in its den, Ned said, and it will be kept there until the lords come to see it is a cat. He set his hands upon the table, knuckles square against the painted river. Give me my daughter, he said again. Begin with that. Cersei's lips pressed together. She looked at Stannis, at the woman in red, at Davos as if still learning his face, at Varys and hating him in a way that felt fresh. A wine turned. She looked last at Ned. Tomorrow, she said, and was gone like a flame blown sideways. No one spoke until she had passed the second arch. Then Littlefinger laughed softly. You push too hard, he said to Stannis. Kings are made with wine and bread and songs. The law is useful after, to keep the drunkenness from lasting past the morning. They are made with blood, Stannis said. We simply prefer to forget whose. That, Varys sighed, is the tedious sentence we have had all day. That night, Ned slept for an hour and dreamed of a heart tree that did not grow in the Red Keep and of a boy with hair as dark as river mud and eyes as blue as winter sky held over ice. He woke with the taste of iron in his mouth and went with Tomard and 2 of Stannis's men along the covered walk toward Maegor's Holdfast. The bridge had been lowered. That frightened Ned more than its being up. Cersei kept her word. Sansa came toward him looking small and very carefully brave. She had braided her hair herself, and it lay uneven and still beautiful. She crossed the bridge like a child being watched by gods she did not wholly trust. When she reached her father, she went to her knees at once, as a lady should, and then she sprang up at once, as a daughter should, and clutched his waist and breathed like a bird. "I want to go home," she said into his doublet. "I want to go home now." "You will," he said into her hair. He felt her tremble with something that was not just fear. Not this hour, but soon. She wept without noise and then pulled herself together and made her mouth smooth and her eyes large. Ned took her hand, warm and damp, and put it into Arya's, grubby and fierce, as if 2 halves of a broken thing could be pressed together and persuaded to be whole. "Where is Jory?" Sansa asked with sudden panic. Ned bent, thumb upon her cheek. "Gone," he said. "Gone bravely. We will remember him." "I will pray for him," Sansa said, which was what she could do. At the 2nd hour after noon, the lords of the city and those within a ride who could be bribed or coerced or flattered into coming crowded the great September of Baelor. Sun spilled through colored glass, making the floor a pattern of blood and water and wheat. The High Septon waddled like a sacred goose. Ned had not decided whether to despise him or pity him. He decided to keep his counsel and his face still. They had not brought Joffrey. The Queen had sent word that he was indisposed and that the heat did not suit his temper. They had brought Myrcella and Tommen, 2 children dressed beautifully and looking as if they had been told a story that had frightened them and then were scolded for being frightened. Barristan stood behind them like a wall. Meryn Trant lingered like a stain. Varys drifted. Littlefinger argued with a Tyrell cousin in the back pew in a kind of flirtation boring enough to be a kind of weapon. Stannis stood where a man stands when he wishes an argument to be short. Melisandre placed her hands together as though praying to a god who listened to perfection. Ned watched the faces. He always watched faces. He watched Ser Harry's Swift, who had never learned subtlety and had discovered that wealth could learn it for a man. He watched Lord Rosby, coughing delicately into his hand as if he could remove his own ribs by politeness. He watched men who wore the lion upon their rings, and men who had taught themselves to look neutral and who were worse. He spoke first. "The king is ill," he said, and a murmur rose and fell. "He is brave. He is stubborn. He will live." He did not believe it. He let some of that unbelief into his voice like a spice. "He has named me protector of the realm until the rightful heir is of age. That is written. That is sealed." "What heir?" a voice cried, too loudly, from the 2nd row. It was Lord Stokeworth, and his daughter pinched his arm without effect. "Name the boy or don't pretend. The law is not a pastry to be cut without filling." Stannis did not smile. "I am Robert's heir," he said. "His firstborn son is—" He glanced at Tommen, perhaps out of kindness, perhaps out of duty. "Is not his son. That is what we are here to say plainly." The murmur became a noise. For a moment, it drowned the colored light, and even the High Septon looked surprised that gods could be interrupted. Cersei stepped forward. She did not look at Stannis. She looked at the people, and her eyes were beautiful, and there was wetness in them that made men forgive themselves for being moved. "This is cruelty," she said. "This is envy speaking. This is an angry brother. This is not justice." She put one hand upon Tommen's head as if blessing him. "This is a child." She looked at Ned, straight then, and her voice changed. "If you had ever loved Robert, you would not do this. If there were a spark of the man I thought you were—" "If there were," Ned said, because he was tired of her plays, "I would say what I am saying. Knowing my friend died among men who lied to him when he needed truth." He looked around the September. "You know what Baratheon looks like. You have seen his brothers. Look at this child. Tell me he is a stag and not a lion's cub. That is a vulgarity, Pycelle puffed, moving his jowls with indignation. Hair does not prove. Hair, eyes, jaw, Stannis said purely. And there are bastards in the city. Bring them. You will see the king's face upon their heads like a seal. He said it with no shame and no relish. You will see that truth is under your feet, and you will decide whether to dig it up. The testimony began then. It was ugly and slow and felt like a kind of flaying of words. Men brought the memory of a book to stand beside the memory of a man. Varys observed with mild interest and a sadness that might have been real. Littlefinger slipped away to whisper to Janos Slynt and to 3 others and returned to look bored and thoroughly pleased with himself. By evening, opinion had not been made into certainty, but a number of men had decided they would be more comfortable upon Stannis' side. A number had decided they would be safer in the country. A number had decided to wait. That last number worried Ned most. Men who wait learn to sell time. They returned to the Red Keep weary of the way truth and lies made the same sound when spoken by men with enough confidence. And in the night, while Ned drifted for a few stolen minutes in a half-sleep that was mostly taut nerves remembering how to loosen, a raven flung itself against the window. Tomard opened to it and Davos. Davos was there, he was always there in these days. Took the tube from its leg with hands that had never trembled hauling sail and found, for the first time in years, that they trembled at a piece of paper. It is from the Eyrie, Davos said, and handed it to Ned as if he gave him a blade so sharp it could cut the night in two. Lysa's hand, neat and hysterical. Tyrion Lannister had left the Vale, free by law though justice had not liked the shape it had taken. He went to his father. Tywin Lannister was mustering. 1,000 fires had been seen along the Blackwater Road. The riverlands burned where men wore red and gold. The mountain had come down from the west with teeth. Ned felt nothing for a long moment but that old, cold northern clarity. Each fact was one snowflake. He would stack them into a drift until they could not be denied. He woke Stannis with the dawn. The west comes, he said. The riverlands bleed. Stannis stood at once. I will meet him, he said. You will hold the city, Ned said. If you go to war at once, we lose the shape of the law we have bent so hard to keep. Let him come. Let him break himself upon walls and lack of king. Let him tire. We will send north for men. We will send to the Eyrie. We will send to the Trident. We will bring him into the court we have made and make a criminal out of a lord. I know this man, Stannis said. He will not love a court. No, Ned agreed softly. Nor will I love the things I will have to do to hold this city. But I will do them, and you will do what the realm needs. And then what? Stannis asked, and half of curiosity and half of exhaustion made him gentler than he had been since he was a boy. Then we will count the dead, Ned said, and went to send ravens to Winterfell and to Riverrun and to men who would remember his father's name and think and then, maybe, move. 2 nights later, Renly proclaimed himself king at Bitterbridge among fields of flowers and men hungry to believe that victory could be charming. The news came on a gull caught by a boy who had been taught more by hunger than by shame. Stannis read the message and said nothing for a long time. He bit his cheek until it bled and did not seem to notice. Flowers wilt fast, Davos offered, thinking of women with garlands in their hair and men with garlands on their tongues. They draw bees before they die, Stannis said grimly. He will have the reach. Some of it, Ned said. Our wolves are farther, but they bite to hold. Robb Stark marches for Riverrun. There is a river between him and Tywin. Your son is a boy, Stannis said, without malice, which was worse because it was law. He is my boy, Ned said, and for a moment, tenderness, inconvenient as rain in a war, washed over him. He will do what I would do. He will come hard and with his men close around him, and he will not forget why he left his home. Then he will learn fast, Stannis said. He turned to Melisandre, who watched them with eyes that made the air feel thinner. You have told me I am the chosen of your God. You are, she said, like a woman telling a husband something. He would have him know even if he would not hear it. Then I will need the weapons of that god, Stannis said, and Davos's heart went cold. Not in this city, Ned said at once. I will not have sorcery. Stannis's jaw flexed. You will not have the queen's bastards either. I will have the law, Ned said. And in that moment he realized that the only thing keeping the city from turning into a tale later singers would lie about was the stubborn collision between two men who liked the law for different reasons. We will do what we must, Stannis said. And what we must, we will not speak of in the daylight. He looked to Davos. Come. There is a boat to take out into the dark, it seems. Davos felt the old claw of fear dig under his ribs. The last time he had gone into a night on a lord's command, he had come back to a hand that would never be whole. Aye, he said, because he had said aye to worse. They went out by the river, skirting the soft lamplight like thieves of light itself. The wind smelled of tallow and rot. The oars made the least possible noises they could make. But sound carries over water like gossip over wine. Why me? Davos asked. Because you do not lie, Stannis said. And I do not want to lie to myself about what I am doing. I need someone who will remember the name of it. What name is that? Davos asked. Sin, Stannis said. A useful one. He did not shy from it. They made for a little creek north of Rosby where Renly's green silk had been seen. They had no need of walls. No stones stood between them and doing the thing that would break the day in the reach like a jar. Melisandre knelt in the bow and made sounds that no one had taught Davos how to hear. She lifted her gown where it needed lifting, and something came out of her that made Davos think of gulls tearing at a fish too long dead and of smoke rising from an oil fire you had tried too late to smother with wet cloth. It was a shadow. It was a shade. It went ashore like a man who had owed the sea nothing. It moved in a way that made a man doubt whether moving was something he had ever understood until this moment. It went where Renly slept. Before dawn, men woke to screaming, and by mid-morning, bees had lost interest in flowers that had lost their king. Brienne wept. Loras raged and could find no target. The Reach began to fold like a theater's painted backdrop. Men who had pledged this week found themselves free to pledge again. Many rode west to see what the Lannister coin would do when faced with the need to make itself not only heavy but honorable. The Tyrells pulled back into the warm green promise of their own land like a turtle. Stannis returned to the city with night still under his nails. He did not look at Ned until he had seen his daughter. Shireen had been brought from Dragonstone at last. A small, solemn face with half an old sickness upon it and big eyes that brightened when she saw her father and then looked quickly for books. Ned watched Stannis's hand upon the child's hair, awkward and reverent both at once, and saw a man who had spent too much time teaching himself not to need. He turned away. His disgust had no appetite for this kindness. It did not know what to do with it. 2 days later, Robert died. He died without enough noise for a man who had woken the world with his voice and his hammer. He died with Cersei's name on his lips and with a look that might have been apology and might have been rage. Pycelle wept and caught the tears neatly on a silk that had been washed in scent. Varys bowed his head and thought of small folk who would sleep better under one kind of king or another. Littlefinger built 3 new plans before breakfast and discarded 2. Stannis stood at the foot of the bed and looked upon his brother for a very long time. I told you never to go boar hunting drunk, he said at last, as if the absence of laughter were a wound to be washed. Then he left. They crowned him in the great September with fewer flowers than Renly had deserved and more than Stannis liked. The High Septon held the circlet with shaking hands. The lords came and knelt, and some of them meant it. Barristan laid his sword at the king's feet and swore again, the words old and deep as roots. Janos Slynt bent the knee and tried to pretend it pleased him. Ned stood where a man stands when his duty is to be seen in order that other men can find theirs. He thought of Winterfell and snow along the tilting roofs. He thought of hot bread and of the sound the weirwood leaves make when they give secrets back to wind. Cersei did not attend. Word came that she held Maegor's holdfast and would not yield it to any but her father. A lion to the end, some said approvingly. A stubborn fool, said others, less loudly. On the 7th day of Stannis's reign, Robb Stark crossed the neck with a river of men behind him. He left a garrison at Moat Cailin and went down the Green Fork in 2 columns, one light and fast, one heavy and slow, each with bannermen who had once been boys under Ned's gaze and would have it again and stand straighter for it. Catelyn rode between the rivers, her face a map of grief and resolve, her eyes as clear as the morning of a day when the weather changes. On the 10th day, Tywin Lannister sent a letter. It said nothing that words had not said in other mouths in other years. It was an old letter with a new seal. He denied, he proclaimed, he threatened in elegant lines. He named his daughter a queen and his grandchildren royal. He named Stannis a usurper. He named Ned a traitor. He named Robb a reckless child. He named the Riverlands ungrateful. He named the world as he liked and asked the world to become it. Stannis's mouth tightened as he read. He names quickly, he said. We will reply with slower knives. They made ready for siege then, for sally, for negotiation, for the air that went thin when men decided to hold their breath until someone else breathed first. Ned sent letters to Winterfell with such regularity that ravens must have learned the path north like a bad habit. He told his wife nothing he could not promise. He told her everything else he could not keep from writing. He lined the city with northern caution, one order at a time. Sansa learned to walk the corridors without stumbling. She learned to keep her face polite when the queen insulted her. She learned to say please to the men who brought her food when she was allowed. And she learned not to ask for lemon cakes because there were none, and asking only made the lack taste bitter. She wrote letters to her mother and to the old septa at Winterfell that she knew could not be sent, and she read them aloud to herself at night as if that made them heavier. She visited the godswood and found no gods. She visited the sept and found none there either. She learned to lean against the wind on a parapet and pretend that beyond the Blackwater there was a bit of sea that would not always be the same color. Arya, trained with a wooden sword Davos had acquired for her in a way that disgusted 3 knights and delighted 2 sailors and worried Ned. Tomard watched with a grin that showed he'd always wanted a boy who fought like a girl. Davos corrected her grip frankly and expected to be bitten for it, and was not. She did not go to the kitchens. She did not go to the stables. She memorized the smell of pitch. It took 3 weeks for Cersei to surrender Maegor's holdfast. She did it not because she had yielded. She did it because food had run low and because she had sent out enough messages to her father that had come back upon their own wings or not come back at all. She walked across the bridge with Tommen's hand in hers and Myrcella's eyes bright with tears she would not let fall head high, wearing a gown the red of Lannister pride and the dried blood color of defeat. She paused before Stannis as men and women watched from the walls and the yard and the windows, and she did not bow. She did not speak. Your children, Stannis said, and nodded to Barristan, who took the little ones very gently, as if being gentle could be a kind of defiance. Your mercy, Cersei said to Stannis, and smiled with all her teeth. I will not forget it. I do not give it for you to remember, Stannis said. I give it because the law is not a thing to make men admire me. You speak as if you have one audience, Cersei said. You have 2. You have always had 2. You have yourself. You have the world. One day, they will quarrel. They already have, Stannis said curtly, and sent her to a chamber with a door that would open only when he permitted. The trial for the boy's parentage was held before a panel of lords who had come within 3 days' ride and a number of lesser men whose faces had never been asked to watch such performances. Men testified who had seen the queen and her brother in too close company. Men testified who had carried night-soiled linen from a bed not shared by a king. Men testified who had watched the Squire Lancel carry wine no man could tolerate sober without flinching. The book made its appearance like the old soldier it was, battered and proud of itself. Stannis spoke little. Ned spoke too often. Littlefinger spoke once and made a joke at his own expense that invited everyone to laugh and then asked them to think a different thought afterward. When it was done, the lords were sent away to come to their own conclusions as if they had not already arrived. Varys arranged for a roomer to meet each man at his door when he left, a roomer tailored to keep him 2 steps nearer to the truth than to the lie. He did this and then sat alone in his chamber and remembered when he had been a boy who had learned that people who needed things could be made safe by men who had no need of anything but power. He was not always proud of his memory. He took out a parchment and wrote a letter to someone across the sea who had learned to change names and had learned to stick with one for longer than was comfortable if the money was good. He never sent it. Tyrion Lannister came at last to his father's camp at Harrenhal and found it a fortress of ash and arrogance. He smiled and spoke softly and did the sums in his head. He advised a river crossing here and a feint there and suggested a list of men who should be bribed, and half of those men were already writing to him with their price and the other half had none anyone could afford. He drank less than he often did and slept worse. He went to the Godswood. Harrenhal's had no heart tree, only a twisted willow that had given up pretending, and said nothing. Robb crossed at the twins with bread and salt pledged and grudges left to be paid in a different coin later. He moved like a boy trying to think like a wolf and succeeding because he had men who had already been wolves and they taught him to smell blood at a distance. Ash. He sent men west to harry, and they found that the west bit back. He sent men east to mislead, and found that some men were not misled because they preferred to be told they had seen a thing before they had. He sent Catelyn to treat with Stannis, and she rode into the city with dust in her hair and hope in her mouth like a secret she would not tell anyone but her husband. When he saw her in the Tower of the Hand, for a moment all the wars fell away like cloaks. He held her. They did not say words that would waste themselves on the air. They sat, and he took her hands, and she took his face between her fingers, and they learned again how to sit with the person one loves after thinking one had lost the chance. "You saved our girls," she said at last. "Half of them," he said. "The other half I am still saving. That will count too later." "It will," she said, because she made truth out of things stubborn people spoke. And then she told him the names of the men dying along 2 rivers, and he told her the names of children sleeping behind 2 doors, and they drew breath into their bodies as if the air had been charged with lightning and not with smoke. When the Lord's judgment came, it came softly, as many judgments do. No man wanted to have said that he had made a king and made a bastard in the same sentence. It leaked into the city like water from a cracked pipe. Men repeated it and pretended they had decided before they had heard it. Women repeated it and did not care one way or the other so long as the price of flour did not double. Children heard it and wondered if it meant the boys who threw stones at them would throw different stones in the morning. Stannis stood upon the steps of the Great September and pronounced the law. He set aside Joffrey, declared him bastardy, named himself king by right and by Robert's death, named his brother's children wards of the crown. He forbade their harm. He ordered their education. He forbade their marriage without his consent. He did not speak the word treason aloud against the queen. He did not need to. He ordered her to the tower and placed a guard upon her door. He sent word to Lord Tywin that his daughter's trial would be held when the war was done. He sent word to the world that the Reach's choice had been unmade by the night, and that he would receive the fealty of any lord who had misunderstood his duty 6 days ago. The city did not riot. The city sighed. There were no heads on the walls that week, and men learned that relief more quickly than they learned any king's new name. On a night when the moon lay upon the river as if remembering it belonged to it, Ned went to the small chamber where Arya kept her new wooden sword and her new bruises. She looked up at him only briefly before returning to a stubborn nod. "You will come home," he told her. "Soon. With Sansa. With me. I will come home when you need me to come home," she said, which was not the same thing, and he loved her for it. She tested the knot and made a face. "Stannis is not like Robert." "No," Ned said, smiling despite himself. "No, he is not." "He is like you," she said, triumphant at the knot's surrender. "Only angrier." "God spare Westeros," Ned murmured, and she grinned, all Stark for an instant, wolfish and lit from inside by some honest fire no priest could mimic. In the morning, Stannis sent Davos south with letters for the lords of the Stormlands who had let Renly's flowers blind them. He sent him because Davos made the law sound like a promise instead of a threat. He did not send Melisandre because he had learned that a little sunlight makes shadow darker, and that there are times when you need to pretend you do not know the night. "Bring me men," he told Davos. "Bring me men who like to do what is written, not what is whispered." Davos nodded. "I," he said, because he had learned that for some men the only music worth dancing is the drum of their own hearts. He took ship down the coast to Storm's End, to Tarth, to Nightsong, to Greenstone, carried letters as if they were salt that would keep fish from spoiling and was as necessary. He found men who had loved Renly and were ashamed of it. He found men who had hated Stannis and were ashamed of it. He found men who had loved no one and were proud of it. He told them a story that did not ask for tears. He told them what law was. Many came. Enough came. Robb Stark met Tywin at the Red Fork near Riverrun under a sky that promised a storm and delivered one. Men died with their faces to the rain. The sound of steel under water is like a bell rung under a blanket. Muffled, intimate, obscene. Robb held because he had learned to hold, and when he could no longer hold, he let go before Tywin could push him and made the letting go look like an ambush. He took 1,000 prisoners and lost 600 men and sent moving letters to his father about honor, and to his mother about horses, and to his bannermen about patience. He did not call himself king. He called himself son. Catelyn came again to King's Landing, this time with mud upon her cloak that had not had time to dry. "He is learning," she told Ned with a pride that stung like a bruise. "He will have to." Ned took her hand. They walked the yard where once Joffrey had insulted the butcher's boy and started a cascade of cruelties. Ned had been too slow to halt. He thought of that boy often. He thought of Sansa and the songs she had loved and the ways she was learning to love different ones. He thought of Arya and the dance she did that could become a killing if a man was not careful. He thought of Stannis and the way his face could become an instrument when a man forgot to be human. "What would you do if the king asked you to burn the gods?" Catelyn asked at last, quiet as dust. "I would refuse," he said. "And if he ordered it, I would disobey. And then we would count the dead," he said softly, echo of an earlier hour, "and bury them ourselves." Yes. He told Stannis what he had told his wife. The king's eyes narrowed as if he weighed both stubbornnesses and found them each too heavy to lift. "I will not do it here," he said at last. "I have other fires." "You have the city," Ned said. "It would be decent if you kept it." "I will keep it. With you," Stannis said, and for the first time there was a note in his voice that sounded like reliance instead of demand. Ned did not relish it. He accepted it. One dawn in late summer, while the air still smelt of hot dust and river rot in equal parts, a messenger came up the hill from the docks with a speed that made even the gold cloaks glance twice. He had ridden his horse rough and his voice rougher, and he delivered his words like a man vomiting poison. "Lord Stark," he cried, and looked at the hand with hope that made Ned wary. "From Dragonstone, a bird from the east. News from the narrow sea." "Say it quietly," Ned said, because he had learned how words rippled. The messenger swallowed. "Ships," he said. "A queen in exile sailing west with soldiers under red banners. 3 dragons on gold." Ned was silent a long time. He had once thought winter the only certainty left in the world. He had learned that men could find ways to make more. "What do we have?" he asked Stannis later. "To give our children? A cleaner law than we found," Stannis said, which was the best he could do. "Bread," said Davos, who had returned with a tale of Storm's End bending the knee at last. "If we keep the bakers baking." "Stories," said Arya behind them, because she had learned to enter quietly. "Happy ones." Ned turned. She grinned and then forced her face solemn and then laughed at her own failure. He thought of Winterfell, and of a heart tree whose red leaves never fell, and he thought of a little boy with black hair building a snow fort. He thought of Sansa, tracing stitches so small they looked like printed words, and he thought of Robb's wolfish smile when he had discovered he liked the weight of command and was not ruined by the liking. "Bread and law and stories," Ned said. "We will do as well as any men might with those." It was not an answer the city would sing. It was not even a song. It was an agreement made under a sky that forgot too easily it had been promised rain. It was enough for a day. That night, in a room where a map lay like a patient upon a table, Ned and Stannis bent together over small carved figures and moved them as men move hope from one place to another. "The lions will not forgive," Stannis said absently. "They are not in the habit," Ned agreed. "We will hurt them where their coin lives," Stannis said. "We will hurt them in their pride. We will take their sons and their bannermen and their faith in being feared. We will break them carefully." Ned looked up. "Carefully? Yes," Stannis said, and for a moment a ghost of humor moved at the corner of his mouth. A thing half mechanic's grit and half remembered boy. "Carefully. It is an art I am learning." "And after?" Ned asked. "After," Stannis said, looking not at the map but at something only he saw. "After we will see what winter wants from us. After we will be quieter than we were." He drew a breath. "After, I will ask you to go home." Ned looked down at the river painted upon the table and thought of real water. He thought of ice. "After," he said. In his dreams, the weirwood at Winterfell opened its eyes and did not weep. In his waking hours, he measured wool and counted grain and signed writs and sent men with letters and men with swords. He put one foot in front of the other. He listened. He spoke only when speaking was required. He watched the sea. He kept his daughters near enough that he could call and hear their voices answer. When the first leaves in the red keep's garden browned at the edges, men said summer had lasted long and would end in ease. Men said many things. None of them spoke of dragons, not yet. None of them spoke of dead things that were not content with their rest, not yet. None of them spoke of songs that would have to be unlearned. For now they spoke of law grudgingly, and of bread. And in the quiet that followed after bell and scream and shadow, in the rooms where responsibility lays its weight like a winter blanket, Ned Stark waited not for doom but for work. He had learned that work could be a kind of prayer. He had learned that waiting, if done with care and not as a disguise for weakness, could be a sword. That was the lesson Stannis learned too, though he would never call it that. He learned to stand still and be obeyed and do without applause. He learned to temper law with such mercy as did not make it bend. He learned to say no to his God in a city that would not forgive him saying yes. He learned to trust a northern man twice a day and a sailor every hour. He learned to watch the sea and see not just ships but seasons. And Cersei Lannister, in her tower, learned how long a day can be when a door is locked from the outside and a woman counts the ways a story could have been told differently. She learned nothing else because she would not. Tyrion Lannister learned to count the price of a lost capital. He learned that wit was a blade that dulled quickly when it had to be used on rope. He learned that his father's hand could be a wall and a cage at once. He learned, too, how to laugh alone, and that is a small mercy and a great curse. Robb Stark learned to write orders that sent men to die and to sleep afterward. He learned to eat quickly and to take his saddle thinking already of where to dismount. He learned that not calling yourself king is sometimes another way to rule. Varys learned to let go of 3 little birds he had kept too long. They fluttered to new perches. He told himself he had not used them. He had released them. Lies turned easier in a mouth that knew good reasons. He used the good reasons like herbs to cover a taste. Davos Seaworth learned to sleep on dry land without dreaming of drowning. He learned to walk the corridors of power and to duck without bowing. He learned to watch for a child slipping where she had been told not to go and to pretend not to see if she had a good reason. He learned to love a city that did not love him back, and that is something. And Arya learned to strike a man's wrist so his sword flew free, and to use the back of her hand to push hair from her eyes without losing sight of her target. She learned to sit still long enough to hear what was being said when the door was not meant for her. She learned to smile when smiling took more courage than hitting. She learned to keep her promises to herself. Sansa learned to sing again, though more softly, and to sing songs that spoke of women who did not wait at windows but walked through doors. She learned to curtsy without looking small. She learned to write letters that told the truth without telling men why it mattered. She learned to pray for men who did not deserve it and for herself most of all. And Ned Stark learned that the difference between being a dead man honored and a living man useful can be a single decision, quietly kept. What if he had waited for Stannis? He had. It cost him more nights than he had thought he had left in him, and it saved more days than anyone would ever count. It was not a song. It was a story. He was content to let other men make songs out of other men. Stories would do. They were made from law and bread and patience, and they held. For a while they held. Tyrion Lannister found Harrenhal a ghost that had learned to be proud of being dead. The great towers reared like burnt fingers, and in the courtyards the wind worried at ashes that had long ago learned to settle. Men made pretend of banners and bustle, but when night came the fires could not warm the stone. It carried old heat only, the heat that had once been dragon, burnt into it as memory. He sat upon a bench carved with leaping hounds and watched his father count men as he counted everything, as if weighing coins with their weight and the noise they made when they struck table. Tywin's hair was steel set in order. His hands, gloved and kid, lay atop a sheaf of parchment as if they were another kind of document to be read. "Renly Baratheon is dead," Tywin said without preface. It was how he liked to begin conversations, with the part that would have been climax in a song. "The Reach will be leaderless until some gardener remembers he owns clippers." "How sad for the roses," Tyrion said. He had slept 3 hours in as many days and had a headache crouched behind his eyes. It made his wit brittle, which made it worse. "Will we send condolences or swords?" His father's gaze did not waver. "We will send Littlefinger." He pushed another parchment across. "He rides for Bitterbridge at once." "Peter Baelish," Tyrion mused, rolling the taste of the name around like wine he did not trust. "To pick the flowers to our vase? I cannot decide if that is clever or the sort of desperate that gets men laughed at in the Seven Hells." "Both," Tywin said. "The garden is large. He will take a long-handled hook. He will promise what we cannot give and deliver what we can. Titles, offices, winter corn." His mouth pressed flat. "He will give them a story. Mace Tyrell likes stories where he is the hero. The Lady Olenna likes stories where she is the author." "Ah," Tyrion said softly. "The Queen of Thorns. I have always imagined I would enjoy her company from a safe distance." He rubbed at his temple. "What bride is he to offer?" "My grandson," Tywin said, the words as level as a blade, "is a king. In the West," Tyrion agreed pleasantly. "And in the songs in your head, father." He tilted his head. "The capital is not a trophy you can draw upon parchment and call taken." Tywin's eyes were animal quiet. "The capital will be retaken. By the Reach marching with us and the red wine oars cutting the sound," Tyrion finished. "If the roses choose us." "They will," Tywin said as if unwillingness bored him. "They hate the man who killed their golden boy." Tyrion turned the thought over like a coin. It was a coin with blood on it. "Prove that Stannis killed Renly," he said, and heard the brittle in his voice again. "Prove that a shadow can wear a knife, and I will clap your hands to warm them." "Men need proof only to quiet themselves while they do what they would do in any case," Tywin said. "Get me wine." Tyrion obeyed because defiance for its own sake is a child's game, and he had outgrown it in one direction if not in all. He poured for himself, less than he wanted, and watched his father's rings bright in the lamplight. He thought of King's Landing under another man's hand. Not a fool's, not the kind of king who spent coin like appetite. Stannis was an iron soup to drink. Nourishing, sour, difficult to choke. Ned Stark's hand made it worse. That northern quiet in the heart of southern stone. "They will not be moved by our love for law," Tyrion said. "No," Tywin agreed. "They will be moved by fear and by pride and by the promise they will have the right to do what they already do but with flowers on it. Marjorie is to be queen. If not in the September of Baelor today, then in another sept tomorrow. The faith will oblige." "Faith obliges whoever pays for incense," Tyrion murmured. He lifted his cup. "To markets that sell grace." Tywin did not drink. "We will churn them," he said. "The boy in the north cannot hold me and hold his river both if the southern plain moves as one. Write to your sister." "What would you have me tell Cersei?" Tyrion asked, amused at the question before the question. "That she is to cease trying to bribe jailers and to cease trying to send letters sewn into the seams of dresses," Tywin said, as if reciting what he had for breakfast. "Tell her to behave like a queen so that I may lie and call her one. Tell her the boy is to be kept fat and healthy. Tell her I will have my son back." "You will," Tyrion said thoughtfully. "If he allows it." He did not smile. Jaime had always sought the door that led toward the loudest danger. It had always seemed to him a form of courtesy, to do what other men only wish to. Where is the Kingslayer? North of the Red Fork and too far from me. Tywin's tone flattened further. Bring me Janos Slint's head when we take the city. Ah! Tyrion swirled the wine. You have decided he chose poorly when he chose to bow to Stannis. I decided it when he failed me once in a room where I asked him to do one thing well, Tywin said, and Tyrion remembered the first time he had seen his father displeased with a man in public and the quiet that had followed. After Littlefinger had ridden, a feathered trickster gull in summer finery, laughing to cover the tally he kept with every breath, Tyrion walked the yard. The air smelled of iron and water, and men went about their business with the cheer of those who had remembered that they are alive and may be called upon to defend that luck. He stopped at a fire where a pot of thin stew pretended comfort and listened to soldiers speak of Stannis like a weather that would change if they cursed it hard enough. Shadow, one said. No, you fool, a man. All men look like shadow with candle behind them, another replied. A man with a knife. Not if the knife was the dark, said a third, and crossed himself out of habit. Not sure which god he wanted to warn. Here's to knives made of law, Tyrion announced pleasantly, and their laughter, which should have been easy, stumbled. At Bitterbridge the tents were gardens and the men bees without discipline. The roads were full of perfume and of armored feet. Gentlemen hawked silks and girls hawked other things, and both transactions depended upon the buyer's willingness to be deceived. In the largest pavilion, a boy with eyes like green glass stalked like a ghost. You are not to leave him alone, the old woman told the boy's mother without looking at her. You are to make a ceremony of grief and not of folly. We are not fools. We are Tyrells. Mace Tyrell puffed under his mustaches like a pastry that had been baked too long and taken out too soon. Mother, he began, and she cut him with a glance like a paring knife. Do not mother me, the Lady Olenna said. You saved a boy from bleeding to feed a story. It will do for now. Go and be a lord. Marjorie Tyrell sat quiet with her hands, for once, plain on her knees. Grief looked well on her. Everything did. She looked toward the tent wall where the light from outside made the canvas a pale veil for shadows. Who did it? She asked, with the simplicity of a child asking who had eaten the honey before breakfast. Olenna tilted her head. Men will say Stannis did, she said. And I am inclined to agree if only because it will make choosing easier. She sniffed. Men who prefer hard bread to sweet will always be accused of stealing a boy's tarts. It is one of the small consolations of being sensible. Renly laughed, Marjorie said. He laughed and then he did not. The curtain flapped. Peter Baelish made his bow as if he had been laughed into the tent by applause rather than wind. My lady, he purred to Olenna. And my queen, pardon my princess, how it delights me to find you well. Does it? Olenna asked. I dislike being delighted against my better judgment. She eyed him up and down. You wear the sort of smile men wear when they have 2 coins in their pocket and want the world to believe they have 4. I have 3, he confessed. 1 for you, 1 for Lord Mace, and 1 I will spend on a song about the lovely Marjorie's virtue when she is married to a king. Which king? Mace demanded, eager to be told it was his choice. Your future son-by-law, Littlefinger said lightly, Joffrey Baratheon. He will marry the queen you have made and he will be king in truth. Today in men's mouths, tomorrow under the gods' eyes, as soon as the city's gates are opened. Lord Tywin comes like good weather. The red wine fleet will bring rain to soften the earth. Olenna's brows climbed. You propose we marry our rose to a briar, she said. He has thorns. We have gloves, Littlefinger said. And pruning shears. And a mother, Olenna said. The worst weed in any garden. She is contained, Littlefinger murmured. A queen in a room is a vase of water. She looks well and too much of her spills. My lady, forgive me. I mean only that men will be in charge of that door. Olenna's mouth made a courteous shape. Men who answer to Tywin Lannister. Littlefinger's eyes were merry. For a time, he said. And then to you. He leaned closer. Or, if not that, if the rose prefers known soil to new, a northern match can be made. Ned Stark is conservative and correct and will be grateful to any man who keeps his daughters unbloodied. The elder, Sansa, is pretty and pliant. The crippled son of Highgarden is kind and clever. The Reach can be tied to King's Landing with a knot men will admire. Whichever king has Marjorie for queen and Sansa for sister-by-law will be a king no one will dare to call winter. Think of the harvests. Do not try to sell me bread with my own wheat, Olenna said, but she was not displeased. Men had the right to be slapped when their flattery was so deft. Why should we not tie our knot to the north and let Stannis stew in his own tight tunic? The girl is comely. The north is distant, which is sometimes a mercy. Because, Littlefinger said, as gently as one strokes a cat he wishes to steal, Stannis will not love you. He will tolerate you, as he tolerates law and warmth and small talk when they are necessary. He will not give you the south. He will not give you maester's chains or ships to command. He will not call you warden. He will say it is enough to be good. Men do not follow good when it is sour. They follow victory. Lord Tywin will give you a south to prun. You will march to King's Landing at the head of a host, and the city will open like a melon under your knife. He looked to Marjorie and let his voice turn silk. You will be queen of the young. Queens of the old are dull and keep their shoes on. Marjorie laughed once, short and surprised at herself. Olenna's eyes flicked. And this King Joffrey, Olenna said dryly. What is he good for? Killing men, Littlefinger said without missing breath. Not enemies, not always enemies. But he kills them, and the realm will forgive many things so long as a king looks like he enjoys doing kingly things. He bowed again. And if he is intolerable at home, well, a garden has walls. Ladies have husbands. Queens have arrangements. Bring me proof you can make this city open, Olenna said. Bring me oaths. Bring me grain. Bring me a septon who will say what I tell him. Bring me a fleet. She glanced without looking at Marjorie. Bring me men with faces that will look well at my granddaughter's table and without too much meat between their ears. Littlefinger's smile sharpened. I will bring you everything, he said, because bringing makes me necessary. Bring yourself out, Olenna suggested pleasantly, and let me talk to my son. He backed out as if he floated. When the curtain fell, Mace's bluster rushed to fill the quiet. Mother, he said, the Lannisters will take half the glory if we do this. They will take half the trouble if we do not, Olenna returned. She tapped the arm of her chair with one finger, a metronome for her own thinking. Sansa Stark to Willis, you say? She mused. We will have that either way. I see no reason to leave good sense on the table because the cake is sweet. She lifted her voice without effort. Send for ravens. We will court both kings and wed no one until the wedding is ready. We will be courted like a maiden who knows the price of her own hair. Back in King's Landing, Varys brought the news of the Reaches dancing with a face like a man anxious for someone else's health. They send smiles in two directions, he told Ned Stark in the Tower of the Hand. One toward Lord Tywin, one toward us. One never knows which smile has more teeth. Assume both, Ned said. He had learned that when Southron smiled, a man did well to count his fingers afterward. What matters is time. How long until they must choose? They will not hurry, Varys sighed. Flowers are patient when frost waits. We will not be, Ned said. He had bread to count and bricks to count and men, always men. He had sent Janos Slint to the wall quietly, with coin in his purse and the impression he had been promoted. Lord Commander of Somewhere Cold, Varys had joked, and Ned had not smiled. Commander of the City Watch was given to a man who could count to 10 and back and did. He was called Hara the Hook after a scar that turned one lip up in a perpetual sneer not entirely earned. He wore no Lannister red in his coat and no stag. He wore a plain city's badge and looked upon the watch like a fence that must stand through the night whether anyone praised it or not. Barristan Selmy came and went, a white ghost in halls that had grown accustomed to gold and crimson. He watched the practice yard and had a word for each boy. Arya watched him watching and learned more from his eyes than from the words he kept to his mouth. When he had time, he showed her where a man's wrist betrays him. When he had less, he nodded once, and she practiced his nod the rest of the day until Davos said, laughing, that nodding at the air would not keep her from losing teeth. Sansa walked the yard with a sunny-faced girl whose father baked for the court and whose brother carried water to the dragon's bones in their den below. The girl loved stories and asked Sansa to tell them. Sansa told them new ones she had made where girls did not fall upon men's swords by accident or design. She told them quietly so as not to irritate the wind that carried rumors like seeds. Melisandre watched the city as a cat watches birds that have not yet learned it is in the room. She learned the turns of Maegor's holdfast and the way the drawbridge creaked when a man used it. She learned the weight of the keys on the ring in the king's hand and the weight of the look Ned Stark had for her when she passed him in a corridor. "You are not wanted here," Ned told her once, and she smiled. "Few things that are needed are wanted," she said. "Stannis is wanted less. He is more necessary. Necessary is a kind of god men invent when they have no better stories," Ned said, and she inclined her head as if learning a new poem. On the 3rd week after Robert's death, a river ran red under willows near the Whispering Wood, and Jaime Lannister woke with a taste of earth in his mouth and bonds on his wrists. It had been quick and long both at once. A crash, a tangle in a gully, horses screaming, a horn, a hand upon his collar. He had struck with the joy that lived in him when steel lived and his face had gone cold and happy. Then the weight of men had been too much and a boy with a wolf's eyes had stood over him, breathing hard. Robb Stark did not boast. He did not say that he had beaten the Kingslayer. He had not, and he knew what truth felt like under his tongue. He said, "Bind him." And to Jaime, looking up past a swing of hair that was too much like the mother's for comfort, he said, "You are my father's enemy. I will treat you as befits a lord." Then he turned and went, because victory was not a bed. It was a road. Catelyn walked among the dead with a face that had memorized the lines grief drew, and now no longer winced when the chalk traced them again. She bent closed eyes. She whispered names when she knew them, and when she did not she whispered other people's names, because it soothed her to think the dead would not be unclaimed somewhere. When she reached her son's tent and saw the gold hair that had made her think of knives and kin, for years she stood very still. "You will not send him to Tywin," she said as if talking to the air so she would not have to look at the man on the stool with his wrists corded and a smile that did not like itself. "Not for any price he names. Send him to your father." "To the city?" Robb asked. "Send him to Ned," she said, and made herself say the name without thinking of the boy he had been and the man he had become in halls that smelled of rot. "Let Tywin learn that he cannot scare kings landing with torches in the night. Let him learn that steel held by law is harder than coin." Jaime watched them as if watching a play at Mummer's farce. He said nothing of value, which was an old trick men mistook for foolishness. 2 days later, under guard of Great John Umber and the Blackfish Tully and 6 dozen men who hated the way Jaime's smile refused to die, he went south with his wrists bound and a song running in his head that he dared not hum. It had no words. At King's Landing the gates opened for the party with the caution a cat reserves for a door that might shut behind it on a tail. When the white cloaks came to take the prisoner, Barristan looked at Jaime once and then away, as if the sight were the kindest slight he could give. "You are older," Barristan said quietly. "You are not," Jaime replied, and for a heartbeat there were smiles upon both their mouths that did not know how to be anything but sad. Cersei watched from an arrow slit with her fingers pressed against the stone, as if willing it to be a throat. She did not weep. She did not call out. She folded herself into the smallness the opening allowed. She had learned how to fit into places men expected her not to, and it had made her powerful in a way that went against her taste. She watched her brother cross the yard, golden and dirty and unafraid of being killed because he had never been afraid of that. She watched him disappear into the Tower of the Hand under Northern Guard and Southern Law. "Do not do this," she told the door when it shut between her and what she wanted. In the council chamber, Jaime sat with wrists still bound and sprawled as if he were home in his own chair. Ned stood opposite with his hands upon the table. Stannis sat at the end, not the head, because he had decided the table's painted lands mattered more than seats. "You killed the king you were sworn to guard," Stannis said without ornament. "I killed a madman who would have burned this city to ash," Jaime returned, insolent and honest. "If that is a crime, I am proud of it." "We will try you for other things before we reach that," Stannis said dryly. "We will try you for the ambush on the Street of Steel. We will try you for the murder of Jory Castle." Jaime's eyes flickered. "Your man fought well," he said to Ned, and at last the taunt he had intended came. "I would have liked to meet him again, perhaps in 6 months. He would have had time to improve." Ned's mouth thinned. "You would not have," he said, and Jaime laughed, a short bark of the only truth he recognized. That he loved a fight and loved a man who loved one too. He stretched his fingers. The ropes itched. "I am to be traded," he observed to no one in particular. "It is what I am good for." "You are to be kept," Stannis said. Jaime smiled lazily. "I am better at being wanted." He looked at the red-haired girl brought to pour water for the lords. "Careful," he said as she tilted the jug toward him. "You will spill." She did not. Sansa's hands had learned to be steady even when her heart raced. The man's eyes frightened her. They were too alive, the eyes of a fox too quick to be kept in a trap, and she had learned what foxes did in the snow by listening to Arya. When they put Jaime in a tower cell with a window that opened to air and the sea's faint taste on the wind, he laughed again as if to prove the stone could not keep sound. "At least I can piss out of it," he remarked to the blackfish dryly. "A kindness." "I do not care if you piss on yourself," Brynden Tully said. "Do not speak." Jaime did not obey. He spoke to anyone who would tolerate the noise and to many who would not. He spoke to the guard from First River who had broken 2 teeth fighting in the yard with a man who had made a joke about his sister. He spoke to the quiet-browed lad from Maidenpool who had never left his mother's house before, and who listened because the voice coming from the cell had the light in it that makes men lean forward without knowing they do so. He spoke to Tommen when the boy was brought very carefully past on the way to the garden. Jaime told the child a story about a man who had thought himself brave until he met a cat with no fear. Tommen giggled and then turned pink with guilt and looked about as if the story had been a sin. "Go on," Jaime said softly. "There are worse sins." In the heat of late afternoon, the air in the city made men short-tempered and women short of breath. Bakers sweated and cursed and blessed Ned Stark in equal measure for the grain that arrived in carts guarded by Storm's End men who took their duties like oaths. On one such day, with the light as bright as a coin held too close to the eye, Arya slipped her watchers. Tommen knew the slipping but pretended to be fooled because he had decided a girl learns better when she thinks she has taught herself, and edged into Tobo Mott's forge. Felt like the inside of a dragon's mouth and smelled like work. The boy at the anvil had arms like ropes on a ship and a scowl that did not know how to lift even when he smiled. He made the metal sing, and Arya listened the way other girls listened to lutes. "That's wrong," she said at last, pointing with her chin. Gendry lifted his hammer and glowered. "You tell it," he suggested, and then, seeing the set of her mouth, he made the thing right despite himself. He bent the shoe, turned it so it would fit a shape only he could see and she could nearly imagine. "Better." She nodded. "Better. You're the one who bit a man," he said after a time, curiosity worn casual. "The sailor told me." "Did he?" She shrugged. "He shouldn't put his hand on me." "Won't," Gendry said, and for a moment they were allies against a whole world of hands that claimed without asking. He sank the shoe into water and the hiss made both of them bare their teeth. "You're Ned Stark's," he said, casual again. "I'm Arya," she said. She had learned in the South that names were a more complicated thing than she liked. "Who are you?" "Gendry," he said. "I'm a smith." He said it with pride and with the kind of relief a man says a true thing when he has been forced to be other things. He looked up and, for the first time, really looked at her. Something passed over his face then, quick as the shadow of a bird flying across a courtyard. It did not settle into fear or into joy. It settled into interest, Melisandre came that night to the forge when the coals were banked and the air in the alley had cooled from oven to mere warmth. She stood in the door as if the dark had brought her and the light would not let her leave. Gendry looked up. Arya had long since been dragged off by Tomard, scolding gently. "You have a strong face," Melisandre said, as if she were a man making an offer. And Gendry scowled because no one enjoyed hearing their skull discussed like a melon at market. "And a stronger blood." "My blood is mine," he said, suspicious. He had learned how men take things. "Blood is a river," she said. "You do not own a river. You can only dam it. I hear it when you breathe." She took one step into the glow. "You are a king's son." Gendry laughed and spit to the side out of habit, surprised to hear himself do both. "Me? I had a mother with strong hands and I have a hammer. The only kings I've seen are in my piss when I drink too much beer." Melisandre did not smile. "You have a gift," she said, and he felt his hand close reflexively over nothing. "You are needed." "I'm needed to make shoes," Gendry said, suddenly angry. "Every horse in this city is a king when his nails are crooked. Don't tell me about needing." She tilted her head as if listening to a sound behind him, as if someone were walking up the alley softly. "You will answer when you are called," she said, and was gone as quietly as an ember gives up its last light. Gendry didn't sleep well. In the morning he banged his knuckles and swore, and Tobo laughed at him in Myrish. Ned found Melisandre on the wall walk before dawn, the hour at which men talk to gods or to themselves because almost no one else will. He stopped an arm's length away. In the east, the sky was the pale color of a bruise left long enough to doubt it had been earned. "You will not touch the boy," he said without preface. "I am not your Southron, you," she said. "I am not a cat you can hiss at. I am a flame." She looked at him then, full, and he realized what so many had already learned, that the thing that moved inside her eyes was not a reflection of light but some reverse of it, a dark that had learned to be bright. "You will not touch him," Ned repeated, the northern in him so solid she might have set pots upon it. She spread her hands. "I will take 3 drops of blood," she said. 3. I will not take a life. 3 drops and 3 names. They will go with the smoke." She watched the river. A lord in the west. A lord on an island. A brother already dead. The world is a fabric, Lord Stark. A thread pulled here pulls there. "He is a boy," Ned said. "If your god needs boys' blood to learn their names, he is not a god whose face men should wish to gaze upon." He looked past her shoulder. "If there must be blood for a thing you think must be done, take the king's." He lifted his chin toward the keep. "He is king's blood enough to feed your fire, if feeding is what you want." She regarded him for a long time, the way a woman looks at a wall and decides if it can be persuaded to be a door. "He would give it?" she said softly, and there was something almost like respect in it. "Then ask him," Ned said, "and leave boys in peace." Stannis, woken at an hour he grudged to both gods and men, frowned as if a problem in sums had been presented and did not yet tally. "My blood," he said, as if it were a stranger. "For fire." "For names," Melisandre said. "For will made into wind." "For foolishness," Davos said under his breath, and hoped the god of flames was hard of hearing. Stannis looked at Ned and saw the refusal there like a wall. He looked at Davos and saw hesitation with a spine of iron under it. He looked at Melisandre and saw belief he had leaned upon too often. "Very well," he said. "Mine. 3, you say? 3 leeches." 3, said Melisandre, and the word curled as if pleased to have been given a shape. They did it in a small room with a brass brazier. The leeches fattened obscenely, and the king's mouth tightened as if pain were a petty bill he had not expected to pay today. He cast the first into the brazier. "Robb Stark," he said, and Ned's head came up with a like to a wolf's and then steadied because he was not a boy. Stannis did not look at him. He looked at the leech burn. He cast the second. "Balon Greyjoy," he said, as if choosing the name with cold glee. He cast the third. "Tywin Lannister," he said, and if there was satisfaction there, it was clean. The smell that rose was rank and sweet and wrong. Melisandre murmured in her tongue, and the flame moved oddly, as if a wind blew in a room that had no shutters open. "Done," she said at last. "Done what?" Davos demanded, angry at magic not for being false but for being a cheat. "A trick, my lady?" "A word," she said. "We will hear it again. In time." Ned left the room with his jaw set and found Arya sitting with her back against the stair, legs straight out before her like a child punished. "You said no fire," she remarked, not accusing. "You said." "I said no fire. That hurts children," he said gently. "That thing hurts us," she said, stubborn. "Even if it doesn't touch us." He crouched. "Sometimes men do wrong thinking it right," he told her. "Do not let the wrong put its hands inside of you." He tapped her chest lightly. "Not here." She nodded, grave as a septon, and made the gesture with her palm as if brushing ash from her shirt. "All right." Jack and the Alley Knives came into the city with the dusk a night later, 36 men with the look of men who know doors better than walls. A bribe had been paid that would have opened the King's Gate if Hara the Hook had been the sort of man who liked an extra purse more than an extra dawn. He was not. He moved the watch as if balancing a table on one finger, changing its weight when he felt the air shift. The men came anyway. At the mud gate, Arya was not where she had been told to be. She was where she had convinced herself was necessary. At the shadow of the joinery where the gate's great beam rested. It was where a small man with a thin mustache and a hat too fine for midnight had come to pour oil quietly upon the pins of the hinges. He moved with the carefulness of a man who did not want to break his own lightness. "Don't," Arya said, and he started. And his hand slopped and oil went where oil does not serve men. He grabbed for her. She ducked. She struck his wrist like Barristan had taught her, and the vial flew into the dark and fetched up with a little clink against stone. He hissed in a tongue she did not know. His blade was out and she had a stick. She had learned something about men with blades and girls with sticks. She ran, not away but where she wanted him to follow. He did, his breath hard at once, soft tripping running steps that told her he had done this often in boots that cost more than she liked to think. She turned in at a postern she had learned and then back out another and found herself behind him. She hit him where Davos had said it mattered for sailors when you wanted them off a rope, where the tendon in the back of the knee lies proud as a target. He went down with a curse. "Thief," she said, and was about to strike again when hands closed upon her and a voice said, "Little lady, no," and the hound lifted her by the scruff like a pup with an insolent rabbit. "You," Arya spat, furious at the interference. "Me," Sandor Clegane said. He slammed the dagger man's head into the wall and the man went limp. "You bite." "Sometimes," she said. "Good," he said. "Bite after you cut next time." He set her down. "Go to your father." He turned and there were 3 more men behind him. He did not have time to swear. He took the first with a step that confused a man wearing expensive new boots, a little turn of the ankle that made his blade sing past Sandor's shoulder into night where it did not matter. His own sword went up and in and the man learned about his own ribs. The second hit the hound's ear with a sap that made bells ring in Sandor's skull, and that brought rage into the world for a moment like a sunrise. The third had a crossbow and no good idea how to use it at this distance. Sandor walked into the bow, caught the string with his blade, wrenched down. He had a laugh like gravel when it works loose from under a cartwheel. "Piss poor," he told the man conversationally, and head-butted him into the dark. "All of you." By the time the alarm went full, the mud gate was a confusion of whispers turned to shouts turned to iron. Hara the Hook came with his men like a seam mended in a hurry, messy but strong. Davos appeared as if he had stepped out of the river, dripping, and his men moved like shadow that had been trained. Barristan came too because he had learned in a life that sleep is a comfort men quit when a door opens where it should not. Ned Stark arrived last because he had gone to fetch Stannis and because he no longer ran unless running would keep a man alive. He came with the king and a ring of stormlords who wore their duty like good coats. The attackers melted into the alleys with the same skill they had used to come, but enough were taken that the story could be told whole in the morning. The names they gave were wrong, and that was a truth in its way. The coin they carried had been minted in Lannisport and in Old Town both. Both? Varys breathed, looking at the faces in the jails. 2 smiles. Ned stood beside Stannis upon the gate at noon and let the city see the men with their hands bound. "We have 2 hands," he told the crowd. "One is law. One is mercy. The first strikes. The second stays our arm when we want to kill and should not. Most of these men will not die. Some will. That is how we will do it. You ought to say we will cut all their heads and be done." A woman behind yelled, thin and hard, "Else men will think you soft." "Let them," Ned said, not raising his voice. "Let them test us." He nodded at Hara. The worst of the men died and the rest were set to work hauling stones, patching what they had tried to break. Arya watched from between Davos and the Hound and learned what punishment that does not sicken a man looks like. After, Stannis turned to Ned. "You are too gentle," he said, and it might have been praise. "You are not gentle enough," Ned said, and it might have been friendship. A raven came 3 days later from Pike, black and smug. Balon Greyjoy had strapped a crown of driftwood upon his own head. He had burned a tower on the stony shore and laughed at the shape fire makes when it meets wet. He had sent his daughter to pillage and his son to squander hope. Robb Stark sent a shorter letter, scrawled with the haste that comes from a man with 3 couriers waiting. Ironborn in the north. The twins held. Riverrun secured. Jaime taken and sent. Tywin bald in his den. Bleeding men and refusing to call it bleeding. Catelyn read both and sat with them for an hour, thinking the thoughts of a woman tired of men who named themselves Ings and then required women to make sense of the ruin they left. Then she went to the Hand Solar and said, "We will need ships for the north." "You cannot have them all," Stannis said without turning. He stared at the painted table set up to mimic the one on Dragonstone and did not smile at the mimicry. "The Redwine fleet shifts like a school of fish with a shark behind it. Tywin moves. I can feel him in the road like a storm you smell long before it arrives." "Give us enough," Catelyn said. "Give us ships to carry men to the stony shore. Give us a man of yours who knows how to move steel without flourishes." "Davos," Ned said at once, and Davos, who had only come to the door to report that the storehouses near the fish market no longer smelled of rat and would not embarrass the realm, stopped and lifted his brows. He said after a heartbeat, because he had to say something, and the word he knew how to say was the one that agreed to work. "You will go with Northmen to Deepwood Motte," Stannis said briskly. "You will make sailors of men who have never seen the sea. You will put them ashore where the Kraken has his field hands busy. You will burn ships when you can. You will save them when you must." Davos rubbed a knuckle along his jaw, remembering a coast not his and men not his, and thought of onions under a half-moon. "I will," he said. Arya later would recall the day Davos left as the day she learned how to say farewell without making it a howl. He took her hand because she thrust it at him and squeezed gently. "Practice your cuts," he advised. "Not on your sister." "I don't cut Sansa," she said indignantly. "Good," he said. "She would not thank you." On the 4th week a letter came from Highgarden, penned not by Mace Tyrell but by his mother. It had a firmness about it that made even the parchment seem less inclined to curl in the damp. The Reach would not march yet. The Reach sent grain. The Reach would consider a marriage between Willis Tyrell and Sansa Stark if the Hand and the King saw fit, and if the gods were willing to be thanked aloud for their kindness. The Reach advised that the marriage would be good for the realm and for gardens. It did not mention Lannisters. It did not mention Joffrey. Ned read it twice and then set it down as if it had weight one could not see. He went to Sansa and sat with her in the little room where she kept her careful threads and the rose she had dried out of stubbornness when there had been a rose to dry. He told her what the letter said. He told her of Willis, his hurt leg and his quick mind and his courtesy to hounds and men alike. He told her of Highgarden the best he could, which was to say he told her of its ease and its food and its making of songs. "Do I marry him now?" Sansa asked softly, very steady. "No," Ned said. "When the city is safe. When the roads are clean. When we are not counting swords like bread." She nodded. "Will you ask me, father?" She said then, and looked at him so earnestly he felt the north drop into his throat. "I am asking you," he said gently. "You may say no, and I will write a letter that says the flower was not to your taste and I will take the blame." She was quiet a long while. Then, "I will marry him," she said, "because I would like to be the sort of person who grows things in a place where that is what is done." She looked out the window toward the corner of sky where the river sometimes flashed. "And because I do not want my children to learn to love knives." He closed his eyes for a moment because the world is too much for men more often than they will admit. "You are good," he said, throat rough. "Be careful with that." Arya heard of it from Tomard and looked at Sansa's profile at dinner as if it were a map. She imagined her sister in a garden and surprised herself by not snarling at the thought. "Willis?" she said aloud, and tried the name the way one tries a blade handed by a stranger. She thought it might balance. Word from the west was all smell and smoke and conflicting numbers until a clear bell rang. Tywin had left Harrenhal and moved south in haste, abandoning stores to fire. The rumor ran among the riverlords that the Lord of Casterly Rock had stopped the ears of his host against whispers of a boy and wolves, and had decided the only story worth hearing was the one told by fields of grain unburnt in the Reach. He would meet the roses and together they would cut a path to King's Landing. "He will starve us first," Varys said mildly. "He will attempt to pinch the city until fat men forget what satiety feels like. He will take Duskendale. He will take Rosby. He will pay well and wives will open gates because husbands like to eat. Then we will pay better," Stannis said. "We will pay steadier," Ned corrected. He sent men to Duskendale with writs and promises and a quiet threat that the next writ would be a noose if a gate opened too wide. He went himself to Rosby and spoke to a lord whose cough ate his sentences. He held the man's hand and told him that he would die soon and asked him how he wanted men to say his name afterward. The man cried because he had not expected Honesty's knife to be kind. He pledged to Stannis. He wrote a letter making old arrangements new. He died 2 weeks later and the Watch took his bastard son under a wing. Tywin took Duskendale anyway and then left it to a man whose greed made his nose red as meat. It was the sort of choice that told the Tyrells everything they needed to know about what their share of the harvest would be. Olenna's next letter to Littlefinger was sharper. Her next letter to Ned was softer, and contained the names of 3 men in Oldtown who could make the High Septon sing a tune more to the city's liking if his voice trembled with age. She did not suggest that she had more confidence in King Stannis than in Lord Tywin. She did not have to. In the Red Keep, Cersei tried again to have her letters flown. The dove she had I'd learned to fly only as far as Varys's hand. The man who brought her olives had a sister in the kitchens who had a brother who owed his life to the gold cloaks for a fight not won. Cersei wrote anyway. She wrote to her father. She wrote to Lancel. She wrote to a woman in Lannisport who had once drawn her a bath and sung to her while she wept laughter. She wrote to a knight of the Kettleblacks whose pockets had not yet been found a mouth large enough for all the coin they wanted. "Do you think you are clever?" she asked Varys the day he came to take the sealed tube from her hands before the girl with the bread had finished kneeling. "Do you think you will always win because you are soft and polite and know where to buy perfume?" "Not always," Varys said sadly. "Not in the end. No one wins in the end. We comfort ourselves, my lady. We tell ourselves we are kind while we do what must be done." He looked at the letter. "This will not fly. You should learn to fear me," she said. "I do," he said softly, and she was irritated that the admission gave her no pleasure. On a night when heat had gone and left the walls exhaling warm breath like a beast asleep, Sansa dreamed of a garden and woke to a song coming through the window. A real song. A man's voice in the yard below singing about a girl with a blue ribbon who had decided to cut it. It was clumsy and dear. She smiled into the dark and did not cry. In the next room, Arya breathed like a cat and dreamed of a needle that had turned to steel in her hand. In the tower 2 floors above, Jaime looked at the moon as if it were a joke only he had gotten and then fell asleep at last like a man falling from a horse into a soft ditch. Ned Stark woke at dawn and counted. Men, loaves, would-be betrayals, stores of pitch. Days until his girls would be sent north with Davos when Davos returned. Days until a northern host could arrive at the city's call if the road were clear, days until Tywin reached the field where flowers grew. The morning the red wine sails were seen at the mouth of Blackwater Bay, a cry went up from the walls that had in it both fear and relief. Ships, dozens, scores, white and green and red, painted like fruit. The Fury and her sisters rocked at anchor with their tethers like harp strings. Davos was away. The fleet had his heart in it, and other men commanded his friends. Stannis came to the sea tower and stood with a long glass braced, and did not swear because swearing would have been another man's ease. The Reach had chosen. They mean to force the river, Barristan said, grave, a memory in his face of a boy he had been and a battle he had watched from a hill when Ares had still been merely peculiar. They will come in under the tide and try to land men at the Mud Gate and the King's Gate both. They will find we have learned from worse enemies than Gardens, Stannis said. Signal the chain. There was a chain, old and sullen, where long links had rusted. Tyrion had not raised it in this tale. Stannis had put men to it the first week he had put men to anything in the city. He had not trusted the river to behave. He did not trust anything to behave that could be persuaded otherwise. The boom rose, groaning, across the mouth of the Blackwater like a black smile against the shining bay. The red wine ships slowed, uncertain. They were wine and good wood. They did not know this coil of iron. Loose, Stannis said, and the scorpions on the walls sang. Arrows fell like dry rain. The city's ships, leaner, rowed out, not to meet the Reach but to harry it, the way a man in armor is pestered by gnats until he swats and forgets his sword in his hand. Fireships were few. Ned had set his face against wildfire in the city as a man might set his face against a knife left on a windowsill. But pitch burns well when someone is insulting enough to bring dry sails into a tight river. The trick was not to turn the river to glass. The trick was to make the river a place where a man wanted to think of something else. On the landward side, the Tyrell van came bright and ill-tempered to the walls and found no easy gate open to them and oxen dying in the yoke where stones hit. On the river, the Redwynes tried the ancient dance of oars against current and chain, and discovered that the musician had changed the tune. A great ship called the Lady Temperance, named for a virtue men misunderstood, fouled her oars upon the chain and turned herself so that the next two ships kissed her flank too hard and lost teeth, breaking their own oars and their own confidence. Men yelled in 3 languages. Some prayed. Some called for their mothers. Some demanded orders from men already underwater. The smell of pitch and things burning that ought to have stayed would rolled over the river like an old story. Ned stood upon the wall by the Mud Gate and watched not with glee, because he had never learned it, but with a satisfaction like tidiness. This is how it should go, he thought. Not fire to consume a city while men shouted a cleverness, but iron to stop a river and men to put arrows where arrows had been meant to go since men first cut wood to bend. Barristan stood as if posing for some young painter who would never learn to capture the angle of a head. On the far bank, plated in green, a standard moved 3 golden roses. Loras Tyrell had come to the wall not with a widow's cloth but with a lance that glittered. He looked up once at the stones and saw Stannis's standard stiff in the wind and made a small motion with his head that might have been a curse or a prayer. He wheeled his horse, elegant as a lie, and galloped along the line as if to tell it that youth would carry them even where common sense would not. He did not know whether he wanted the city taken or defended. He wanted one man dead and did not know which man it was, precisely that moment. Stannis, or the shadow he thought he had seen 30 nights ago, or himself before he had learned that laughed. Or has an end. He charged where he could and then wheeled back because the gate did not open and the men on the wall did not break. The press on the water grew confused. A Redwyne captain, older than his timber and no less stubborn, tried to swing a ram of his own to beat the chain and found arrows biting into his tars and pitch licking up his afterdeck. He ordered water, water, and found he had chosen the one word a river does not obey when fire is the listener. The chain held. The tide turned, lazy as an old cat. The trapped ships pressed together until men could step from one to the other and fight as if in streets. Stannis's mariners, used to rough way and harder gods, made their work neat. A ship burned. 2 ships. Not the whole river. Enough for men to go ashore in confusion and be beaten back. At dusk, when the light turned everything to gold that was not and smudged everything that was bright into a painting a child might like. A horn sounded from the south and Tywin's standards showed themselves on a rise. The last of the red wine ships that had not yet fouled themselves upon the chain began to pull back like men reconsidering a letter written in wine. The reach did not break. It withdrew. The way a rose is not beaten by frost but learns to close itself. "They will be back," Stannis said. "Yes," Ned agreed. "But not tonight." He looked over the wall at the men in the yard below. Tired, thirsty, joking in the way men do when they have been frightened and now have permission to laugh at the thing that has not killed them. He looked beyond them at the city. Its noise, its filth, its stubborn refusal to be anything but a place where too many people had learned to live together without learning to love one another. He loved it then for a moment the way a man loves a horse that has thrown him but not broken his neck. In the tower, Cersei sat with a cup of wine she did not drink and watched the light dying on the river and thought, "There will be other days, and each day will have another chance to unmake the story men are writing about me." She had not even the comfort of hating her brother properly. Jaime had laughed when the noise of battle rolled up the stair and had said something soft about iron and water and gods who cared about neither. That night, under a sky newly washed by smoke, Varys slid into a small room where Littlefinger was pretending to nap with his boots on a stool and his sword not far from his hand. "A pretty muddle," Peter said without opening his eyes. "You were not at the walls," Varys observed. "I was elsewhere very usefully," Peter said, opening one eye like a cat. "I whispered to 3 men that they were heroes and to another that his wife looked worried about him. 2 ran away and 1 fought twice as hard and then died in a way that will make a song. This is what I am good for. The roses will not abandon the lions," Varys murmured. "Not yet." "Of course not," Littlefinger said. "Who wants to be loyal to a man like Stannis when one can be loyal to a man like Tywin and pretend it is bravery?" He smiled. "But the Tyrells will keep their petals loose. They will blow where the wind shifts next. That is why they are flowers and not stones." "And you?" Varys asked. "I am bees," Littlefinger said, and got up to look out at the river. In the north, on a coast where rocks were black as old bones and the water came in like someone rowing with his hands, Davos Seaworth beached 2 boats under the lee of a low point and looked at men who had never seen the sea until it tried to eat them and said, "Well done," in a voice that made them ready to try again. Beside him the great John laughed and shook water from his beard and bellowed at the iron-born down the strand, who answered with laughter of their own and a wave of axes. Davos took a breath as if to taste whether he was still alive and then went into it with the clean, plain joy he had learned as a boy. Not of killing but of doing a thing that needed doing with his hands and the right tool. He cut a man who had a squid on his chest and a story in his mouth that had been told too often. Later he would help a woman carry a net and arrange for 5 children to be put on a boat they did not want to be put on, crying, and sent to a hall with bread instead of to a shore with blood. The raven from the wall came on a cold morning that had crept into the city like a rumor of a seasoned people in the south had learned to ignore. It spoke of dead men walking. It spoke with Jon Snow's hand in the margin. 2 lines only, small, of hard blue eyes and night, and of Uncle Benjen's name with no news after it, and of a fist not of men but of orientation. Capitalized because the boy had learned to make nouns out of everything he wanted to be strong. Ned read it and sat with it a long time. He took it to Stannis and to the council and to his daughters. He sent bread north. He sent Fletchers north. He sent a letter to Robb that asked for more than a boy should have to count. "We will go after," Stannis said, as if marking an item on a list. "After the lion and the kraken are taught to look smaller." "They do not want to look smaller," Ned said. "Then we will break them until they do," Stannis replied, and the thing in his voice for once was not anger but something almost like eagerness. Stannis had discovered the usefulness of a plan that began beyond men, the cold that men had not invented and could not bribe. He liked it in a spare, hard way. "After," Ned said, and let himself imagine winter as not just an enemy that loved him but a familiar with whom he would have to sit and talk, year after year, about whether to put another log upon the fire. Before dawn one morning, Jaime Lannister asked to speak to Ned Stark. It amused the guards and they allowed themselves that small heresy. They had learned that some errands of state were the faces of jokes. Ned came because he always came when a thing required it and because he was tired refusing only to produce an emptiness where a conversation might have been. "You will die in that chair," Jaime observed cheerfully. "Not today, not soon, but you will. It will make a better song if someone stabs you in the gut. But in truth you will die bent over paper. Your daughters will weep. Your son will tell men how to plant oats and they will love him for it." Ned stood patient. "What do you want, Sir Jaime?" "Only to see what a man looks like who has not been killed for doing the right thing," Jaime said. "I want to decide if I should have tried it." "You did?" Ned said, and Jaime laughed, scornful and pleased. "If you mean the king," Jaime said, "I did the wrong thing for the right reason. I do not recommend it. Men will call you a monster when you are a child and applaud you when you become one. It confuses a man." "Do you want mercy?" Ned asked, tired of his own patience suddenly. "I want a bath and a sword," Jaime said. "I want my sister and a life that is simple and does not exist. Failing that, I want you to tell me if you mean to kill me when this war is done." "When this war is done," Ned said, "there will be too much work for killing to be any man's daily occupation. I don't know what we will do with you, Sir Jaime. Perhaps I'll send you to bear messages to the Night's Watch. Perhaps I'll make you teach boys to ride." He looked at him levelly. "I will not kill you to appease songs." Jaime's laugh turned real at last. "You are a very dull man," he said, with something like admiration, and Ned nodded once, grateful to be called what he was without malice. Summer drew thin. The city learned to live with drums on the horizon and the river's temper. Laws multiplied like mice in a granary, and Ned struck at them with a cat's patience. Stannis held court 2 days a week and endured with a look that would have made men stammer if they were not stubborn. Barristan placed a boy's hand upon a sword and told him how to hold it, and looked beyond him to the north and pictured snow drifts in his mind to cool himself. Varys bought information with coin and, more often, with kinder things. A blanket, a loaf, a bed moved nearer a window. Littlefinger came and went with the wind and made 5 men believe they each owned a 6th. Arya learned to throw a knife so it turned twice and struck hilt first when she wanted it to. Sansa stitched small flowers on a handkerchief and then took them out and stitched spirals instead and did not know why the change pleased her so much. Catelyn scolded 3 men in a road like a mother with sons and made them bow without noticing they had done it. Robb camped in mud and learned to sleep on rocks. Davos stood in a skiff at dawn off a rocky shore and listened to gulls swear and thought of a little boy who had run barefooted and had not yet been told what he was not allowed to keep. The first rumor of a dragon did not come on a raven. It came in the mouth of a whore who had a client from Lys who had a cousin in Karth who had seen a shadow pass over a wall and had lost his beer from his nose. The woman told a guardsman, who told a baker, who told his wife, who told Sansa because Sansa listened and thanked her and bought bread and asked after her daughter's cough. Sansa told Ned because she had promised she would tell him everything that smelled of danger even if it sounded like a dream, and because she had learned dreams can be spies. Ned told Stannis, who made a noise like stone disapproving of being moved, and told Varys to find out which sky had been involved and whether the men who had seen the thing had been sober. "We will have dragons and dead men, and that will clean the south of Preening," Stannis said unexpectedly, and Ned smiled very slightly. "I will take Preening and bread," he said. "Bread," Stannis agreed. He rubbed at the spot the leeches had pricked, 3 tiny marks like a constellation of unimportant stars. "Bread first." On a morning when the wind blew west and made the sea smell nearer than it was, a rider came from the Rosby road with a banner truce held and a face as white as paste. He fell from his horse before the gate. The letter in his belt was Tywin's script. Even, controlled, the hand of a man who would not let a stroke show temper. The letter said, "Withdraw your claim. Deliver to me my daughter and my grandchildren. Return my son. Accept my apology for any inconvenience. Receive my daughter into exile in Casterly Rock with dignity. Make any arrangements you like for my house to be pardoned for its trivial errors." It was the most outrageous letter Ned had read that year, and that included the one where a man north of the Mummers Ford had attempted to sell him 10 hogsheads of wine that had never been made. Stannis read it and did not throw it into the fire. He folded it and put it in his breast as if saving an insult for a day when he would be short of something to make him angry. "I reply thus," he said, and dictated, "Deliver yourself. Beg pardon to the realm. I will let you take the black. Your daughter will be tried. Your son is safe so long as you do not behave like a fool." He did not add the list of words he would have liked to call the old lion because there was no room on the parchment and because he did not write that way. Ned carried the reply down to the messenger himself and looked at the man's face long enough to see that he had been given a fine horse and bad information and had ridden as if he could outrun his own sense. "Eat," Ned said. "Then go." That night a wind came with sea salt in it, and the river sighed under the chain as if nudging a companion to share a joke. Arya practiced in the yard until Barristan told her to stop because good practice learns to stop before bad habit begins. Sansa and Catelyn sat with a book whose pages smelled of mildew and corrected a story until it looked more like a life than a song. Davos, far in the north, watched a woman kiss a wooden carving of a fish and understood suddenly a thing about gods that had nothing to do with fire. Robb wrote a letter and crossed out "I miss you" 3 times before he found a way to say the same thing without looking like a boy. Jaime Lannister dreamed he was young and woke angry because the dream had been kind. Varys trimmed a lamp and thought about a boy with silver hair on a ship that had not yet left harbor. Littlefinger counted coins and put one into his mouth to test whether it was brass dressed as gold. Ned Stark stood on the wall by the mud gate where shadows were longest and put his hands flat upon the stone as if greeting an old friend. The city sighed and grumbled below. Somewhere a child laughed and someone else cursed. Somewhere a woman sang. Somewhere a man died without anyone knowing his name. Somewhere, beyond river and field and road, winter built itself up in white and whispers. He breathed and the wind met him like a thing that had learned to come when called without becoming tame. He had waited for Stannis. He would wait again, on wolves and war and winter and the ways of daughters' hearts. He had learned to make waiting a blade. He kept it honed. He kept his back to the wall and his eyes on the road and his hand upon the city's pulse. He thought, not for the first time and not for the last. Whatever comes we will count, we will feed, we will judge, we will bury, we will sing. And then we will rise early and do it again.